to the day towards the southeast. Brighter skies emerge, and what that means, we'll see some sunshine, but that sun could spark 1 or 2 showers through the afternoon, anywhere from Borders towards Kent. Elsewhere, a fine end to the day, a bright one, and also warmer. Temperatures typically around 14 or 15 degrees Celsius. Now, through Saturday evening, watch as this cloud slowly thickens from the west. It will grind to a halt across the northwest of the country. Perhaps a little more cloud just moving down towards the southeast. We'll see some clearer skies here, and that's where the lowest temperatures will be. Certainly a bit of a chilly start to the day on Sunday, but it'll be a damp morning across western and northern parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, the Isle of Man, perhaps even Cumbria, down towards the western side of Lancashire. Temperatures here will hold up. Elsewhere, as I said, a bit of a cool start on Sunday. But the cloud will break across eastern counties, the far north of Scotland seeing some sunshine, drying up across Northern Ireland through the afternoon as we see that rain just become confined to more western parts of Scotland. And here's your outlook into next week. It's dry, it's fine, high pressure, and feeling warm with some sunshine.
Mark Dolan tonight is back, this evening in the company of journalist Mike Parry, British military hero Chris Ryan, and outrageous TV star Kim.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one.
Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like
Absolutely.
on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel. Like a stubborn case of chlamydia, I'm back. Welcome to Mark Dolan Tonight. I hope you had a cracking Easter. What a busy show we've got for you. Is a summer migrant crisis heading our way? Amid a lack of evidence they work, is it time to consign masks to the dustbin of history? And after a humiliating Elon Musk interview, are the BBC guilty of misinformation and censorship? Plus, my take on the junior doctors' strike, and I won't be pulling my punches. A lively 3 hours to come, lots to get through. But first, the headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Mark, thank you, and good evening to you. Our top story on GB News tonight, RCN nurses will stage another round of strikes after rejecting a pay offer from the government, the same offer which Unison nurses overwhelmingly accepted. Royal College of Nursing members voted to reject a 5% pay rise this year, as well as a cash payment for last year. The action, running from 8 o'clock in the evening on the 30th of April for 48 hours, will for the first time involve nurses working in emergency departments, intensive care and cancer care. Unison announced today that its NHS members had overwhelmingly accepted the 5% pay offer. Paediatric nurse Olivia Princewell told GB News earlier the government could have offered more.
Junior doctors work for incredibly long hours. So do nurses in conditions that are absolutely ridiculous. To them come to work and be happy with their job. Okay, that's not even safe for the patient. So what we're trying to do here, and I believe that's what everyone is trying to achieve, is come to a situation where there is a sort of agreement between us nurses, the junior doctors, and also the government to feel like when you're going to work, you're safe.
Meanwhile, civil servants will hold fresh strikes after the government announced a pay rise of between 4.5% and 5%. The PCS union's General Secretary describing it as insulting and completely inadequate. Staff will walk out in May and June across government departments and in areas such as the Met Office. Now, the US President Joe Biden has today been brought to tears after a chance meeting at an Irish church with the priest who performed the last rites on his son, Beau. Father Frank O'Grady performed the sacrament for Beau Biden, who died of brain cancer in 2015. The president visited Knox Shrine in County Mayo as part of his final day of engagements. It brings Mr Biden's 4-day trip to Ireland to a close, which the former Taoiseach Enda Kenny has called the longest presidential visit ever to the island. And just lastly, a European rocket is on its way to Jupiter, 4.1 billion miles away, to explore whether or not it supports life. It's going to take more than 8 years for the 6-ton spacecraft called JUICE to get there. It will then spend around 3 years using instruments to investigate whether the planet's 3 moons can support life in its oceans in a £14 billion mission. If it goes well, JUICE should reach Jupiter by July 2031. On TV, online and on DAB+ radio, this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
My thanks to Polly Middlehurst, who's back in an hour. Welcome to Mark Dolan Tonight. Coming up this hour is a summer migrant crisis heading our way. Amid a lack of evidence that they work, is it time to consign masks to the dustbin of history? After a humiliating Elon Musk interview, are the BBC guilty of misinformation and censorship? And in my big opinion, my first on-air reaction to Joe Biden's visit to the UK. I'll be asking, does Britain need Donald Trump back in the White House? In the big story, with 5 million Brits now suffering from type 2 diabetes, we'll speak to the revolutionary NHS doctor who'll be telling me how you can reverse it. Plus your emails, even the spicy ones, mark@gbnews.uk. Lots to get through. Let's start with this. The reputation of junior doctors is on life support as they threaten lives and patient safety with needless strikes that strike at the heart of their commitment as medics to first do no harm. With an NHS already creaking under the pressure of a 7 million long waiting list caused, in my view, by a disastrous tunnel vision focus on COVID, the impact on patient care of these strikes is potentially huge. Now, the junior doctors may have a case for a higher salary. They work crazy hours, and most are heroes. I thank our NHS frontline staff for what they do for you and me, and I always will. And I'm sure that, as with other public sector workers, a negotiated settlement is within reach, but not the absurd and deeply irresponsible demands for 35%. Public sector unions have taken quite the kicking in recent times, with the teaching unions being responsible for masking and school closures during the pandemic, policies which very few are now willing to defend. We've got health unions inciting ambulance workers to strike. Good luck telling me that patients won't be affected by that one. And the Junior Doctors Union not just making unreasonable demands, but deploying statistics about how much they earn, which are debatable at best and misinformation at worst. The well-quoted stat that junior doctors get paid less than a barista at Pret-a-Manger at just £14.09 an hour has been given short shrift by none other than the fact-checking service Full Fact. Here's what they said. And I quote, "The average junior doctor makes much more than this. Depending whether you include extra earnings and time off for holidays, it's probably about £20 or £30 an hour." So they don't get paid like a barista, they get paid more like a barrister. Rumpole of the Bailey and Kavanagh QC, eat your heart out. Now, the reality is that being a junior doctor is like an apprenticeship, and they earn great money once they fully qualify, plus a bulletproof pension and a job for life, unless they remove the wrong kidney or something. And even then, it's probably a slap on the wrist. Meanwhile, the head of the Junior Doctors Union has decided to skip the strikes and enjoy a holiday abroad. You couldn't make it up. Where's he gone? Alicante in emergency? Is he climbing Brokenback Mountain? Is he in Liverpool? Spain? Florida? He has since made a grovelling apology for being away. Well, we should probably apologise for those puns, to be fair. But our economy has been performing far better than many anticipated, with those jokers at the IMF having their gloomy predictions for a year-long British recession prove to be complete nonsense. But our stuttering recovery is being hindered by public sector unions whose strikes are hitting public services and damaging the economy, and whose demands will stoke inflation, which, be clear, is the source of all of our current problems and will further fuel our £2 trillion national debt. Which is why Dr. Sunak, who's got his finger on the pulse, must stand firm. A reasonable settlement for junior doctors is there for the taking, and for our brilliant nurses, who, as you've just heard from Polly, have turned down a new deal. But for medics to go on strike is a new low for the health service. There's no economic case for 35%. Pay settlements like that would turn us into Zimbabwe or Argentina overnight. And there's no moral case for the strikes either, which will deprive patients of the care they urgently need and potentially cost lives. It's enough to make you sick. Reacting to that is my sidekick this evening, broadcasting, radio and Fleet Street legend, Mike Porky Parry. Mike, great to have you in the studio.
And great to be here, Mark. Thank you very much indeed. And you make such cogent points about the doctors. One point about this, which nobody seems to bring up, is that doctors are a very privileged part of our society. Now, I'm not saying that's because they're doctors, but remember, they've clearly come from families who regarded education as a prime thing for their children. So it's all very well to say, well, they spent 8 years training and all that. And remember, by the way, when we're talking about junior doctors, we're talking about anybody below consultant level. Do you see what I mean? So they're not just 25 or 26-year-old doctors spending 24 hours in a hospital in A&E. They are below consultant level. Once they get to consultant level, wow, the world is their oyster. But the point I'm making is that they are so privileged to have been able to enjoy the education which this country has given them, to have been able to enjoy the support their parents have clearly given them. And what they're doing is they're punishing all the people who didn't get that backing from their parents, who didn't get that backing from the state, who didn't get that backing from their own intelligence. You can't become a doctor unless you're pretty bright, because there's a lot of work to do to learn everything a doctor needs. Of course. So what they're doing is they are really hammering down on people not as bright as them. They're basically saying that, look, Oh, and by the way, I saw Dr. Hilary Jones on television this week. He's one of the most loved and respected doctors in this country. Asked the question, will people die because of the actions of the junior doctors going on strike? He said, yes, of course they will. So isn't that the most crucial issue that we're talking about? These guys have gone on strike. When I say guys, I mean men and women who are doctors have gone on strike, knowing, according to Dr. Hilary Jones, that people will die. They are costing people lives. Even when the coal miners went on strike, there was never a case when they were going to cost people their lives, OK? But this is what they're doing. The other issue I want to bring up to you, Mark, is that when I see these people protesting, I couldn't make out whether I was watching an Extinction Rebellion riot.
Yeah.
Literally.
For sure.
Big placards, orange woolly hats and all that. Nobody could work out they were doctors if the sound was turned down. Shouldn't they do what the nurses did years ago? Stand outside hospitals in their white coats with a stethoscope around their neck and say, this is what we are in our country. Please value us for what we are. Instead of looking like a bunch of football fans jumping up and down with signs which say, hoot for the doctors, you know? I mean,
indeed,
it's ludicrous.
We don't want to beat up on those who care for us, you know, relatives. We've all benefited from the efforts of the NHS, yourself included. You're a walking medical miracle, let's be honest, Michael.
I am.
So we appreciate our doctors and nurses, of course we do. But where do you think public opinion will be in relation to nurses and doctors downing tools and going on strike?
Well, Dr. Rob Lawrenson, who is one of the leaders of the junior doctors, calls everybody out on strike and then decides to push off on holiday.
Yeah.
Won't tell us where he's gone. Oh, I've gone to a friend's wedding. That's all very well. But you are trying to destroy, and I use that word advisedly, you're trying to destroy the concept of patients relying on their doctors. We can't rely on doctors. The waiting list, I think, was £7.2 million. 7.2 million people. Yeah. Before this started. It's going to be longer than that. And, you know, when you say, oh, well, they deserve a bit more money, what we never appreciate for those who work in the public sector is that actually, round about the age of 55, you can think about calling it a day and settle back on a very, very comfortable pension paid for by those who work in the private sector all their lives to put the people in the public sector into the positions we want them to be in, and then when they finish, we look after them. I think it's outrageous.
Mike, two quickies before the break. We've seen the mayor in London. I don't talk much about London. I don't care about London because most of my viewers and listeners are north of the M25.
I totally agree. Thank God for that.
But actually, it's a story which relates to all of our great cities, which is the idea of low-traffic neighbourhoods, and, of course, the ULEZ, all these different policies, which is the war on motorists. Now, we've seen Mayor Khan going to court over the validity of his proposed plans for these zones, which will basically freeze out certain cars, costing a fortune if you want to drive in the city. Is this a victory for motorists, the fact that this case is now going to be seen by courts?
Well, it's a victory for common sense that it's got to come under public examination because Mayor Khan was trying to pull this in under the radar, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And hope that nobody noticed. I had some carpets refitted in my apartment only a month ago.
Shag pile?
Well, it was a very nice carpet, and I do live in a penthouse, so obviously...
Listen, you're a man of means. You've worked hard. You've had a great career.
Well, there you go. The guys doing it turned up in a van, which was probably about 8 years old, right? Something like that. Pulled all the carpet out the back, brought it up, put it in the lift, brought it up to my place. And whilst they put my new carpet down, said, Mike, this is probably the last time you're ever going to be able to call on us because if Mayor Khan brings in the rules he wants to bring in for ULEZ, we're out of business. We can't afford to pay an extra £30 a day. We can't afford to buy new vehicles at £30,000. He's putting us out of business, and it's outrageous because wealth is only generated in this country by the small businessman. It's not generated by public services. And if you start putting people like my carpet fitters out of business, we'll all go bankrupt.
The sage of Fleet Street speaks again. Mike Porky Parry with me for the whole hour. I'll be asking him about the birth of the miniskirt later in the show. Of course, Mary Quant, famous fashion designer, passed away. Mike's got a lot of memories of girls in short skirts. It could be, I'll be honest, legally a little bit challenging, but there you go. We'll get to that later. Lots more to come. A very, very busy 2 and a bit hours. Next up, over 100,000 migrants crossed the channel, over 1,000 migrants crossed the channel last week. This comes as more than 4,500 migrants made the treacherous trip in 2023. Is a migrant crisis coming this summer? We'll discuss that next.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, nah, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News. The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my common sense crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel. In my big opinion at 9, I'll be dealing with Joe Biden, and you won't want to miss it. Now, over 1,100 migrants crossed the channel last week. This comes as more than 4,500 migrants made the treacherous trip in 2023 alone. Under the government's migration bill, Rishi Sunak has promised to stop small boats crossings, authorising the detainment and deportation of illegal migrants on British shores. My guest tonight warns that channel migrants will overwhelm our nation this summer if things continue as they are, and is calling for the government to utilise technology to locate where boats are leaving from in France. So does Britain face a summer migrant crisis in the Channel? To discuss this, I'm delighted to welcome former high-ranking naval officer Dr. Chris Parry. Dr. Parry, welcome to Mark Dolan Tonight.
Hello, Mark.
Why are you concerned about the summer and the numbers thereof?
Well, it's not just me. I think most of the country is concerned that we've got a very porous border. We've just started what I would call the boating season. And I think most people who are trying to get into this country one way or the other know that legislation is coming down the track. And they want to try and get into the United Kingdom before that legislation starts to take effect. I don't think, you have to be a rocket scientist to know that. And I'm not convinced that we've got the systems and the procedures in place to deal with that level of traffic.
What do you think needs to happen in advance of the authorities being overwhelmed this summer?
Well, the real problem, Mark, is that the whole policy associated with trying to get our borders secure and safe has been incremental. It's been nibbling away at things. It's been tactical. There's never been a coherent strategy right from the word go. And what you do with strategy is you sort out what you're trying to achieve. And I haven't heard anybody say what they want to achieve politically or even on the ground. You then put the resources in place and you balance that with what is technically and humanly possible. I haven't seen that debate take place at all at any level of government or administration, even amongst the military. Until that's done, you're just going to be trying to pin the tail on the donkey, frankly. My view is that we need to do better in detecting people before they get in the water, and certainly before they get to the median line. We've got drone technology now that combines infrared sensors with radar, and also the ability to intercept mobile phone calls and analyze those. You can combine them together, and you can detect these people getting into the boats, just unhooking the boats from the trailers on which they are. We're not deploying that technology. It doesn't have to go on the French side of the channel. It can sit on our side of the channel. These sensors are very long-reaching, and there's just a failure of imagination, I'm afraid. And if this were a military operation and we had to stop people crossing, we'd do it.
How reliant are we, Chris, on the support of the French to tackle the crisis? Can we do it ourselves unilaterally?
No, we can't, because the legislation doesn't allow us to do that at the moment. And again, the legislation is about 10 years too late. That's the first thing. Secondly, what we should do is see the whole channel as a humanitarian crisis area. And we should be encouraging the French to help us solve that. If this were happening on land, the United Nations would be jumping all over it. And right now, we're treating it as some sort of procedural exercise that ends up with a sort of taxi service that takes people to the United Kingdom. You go back to Roman times, Mark, the channel was seen as a unified single command. And it was, and the navies there were coordinated as such. We should be coordinating this operation as a combined French and British operation. We shouldn't be seeing it as two sides of the channel. It should be a single unified operational area.
Now, you've mentioned that it's a humanitarian crisis. You're absolutely right. People have died crossing that channel. It's a tragedy for them, and they are victims of cruel people traffickers. It's also, isn't it, an economic crisis, given the fact that we're spending in the region of £6 or £7 million a day hosting and accommodating people that have entered the country illegally, often in hotels, which is very disruptive for local communities. It affects tourism as well. But it's a national security concern as well, isn't it? And of course, this is your area of expertise, with reports this week that upwards of 19 terror suspects have crossed the channel illegally.
Yeah, well, it's worse than that. I mean, we've had people come across who are declared murderers. They put it on their sort of entry form, and they've served 60 days for obviously entering the UK illegally and promptly have claimed asylum. So the whole system is totally, as I said, porous. But going back to your point, Mark, we keep putting the burden of guilt onto the traffickers here. Of course they're guilty. They're exploiting people, they're making money out of it. But this is like the argument on drugs. It's not just about the drugs traffickers. We've got to lay some of the blame on the people who are actually involved in this. If there weren't customers, the traffickers wouldn't actually be in the game. And it's the same with drugs. Until we shift the burden of responsibility onto the drug takers, then we're never going to solve the drug crisis. It's the same here. The government's making noises of saying, look, if you come and penetrate the border, you're committing an offence. It's as simple as that. And, in Australia, if you try and do that, you never, ever get granted residency. But I go back to what I said originally, Mark, until you have a strategy in place and know what you want to achieve, and certainly I've never heard what any government is trying to achieve here, you're never going to get anywhere.
Dr. Chris Parry, let's bring in broadcaster and journalist Mike Porky Parry, no relation. But, Mike, how would you solve this crisis?
Well, I've listened to everything Chris has said, and it's brilliant. Chris, I don't want to go back too far, but my father was in the Royal Navy for 6 years. He joined in 1940 when he was 17 years of age, came out in 46. He was on the D-Day landings. Now, Hitler couldn't get across the English Channel. He'd conquered all of Europe, and the last one was Operation Sea Line, get over, conquer the Earth. He couldn't. But all these little boats can. And we don't have a navy these days. We don't have enough ships to be able to even have a presence in the English Channel to try and show people, don't come here. You know, we have to have a barrier and a border between continental Europe and the United Kingdom. We don't have that. The other thing is, Chris, which you kind of touched on, is that one of the reasons people come here is because when they do, they're made so welcome. We don't have identity cards in this country. So anybody who gets here and then slips out of, you know, the problem about being put into a camp or a hotel or something can just join the black economy and can start working anywhere they want because there's no identification cards. America was built on immigrants. I'm told that 1 million times a day. But when immigrants went to America from Italy or Ireland, excuse me, or anywhere else from around the world, the minute they landed at Ellis Island, if they were physically not fit or mentally not fit, they were not admitted, and they were also told, you come here, but you do not get 1 single cent help from the state. You have to prove that you want to be here by looking after yourself. And I just think we're just too welcoming. We're a great country. We've taken in people over centuries to try and help them and make them feel safe. But it's gone, the pendulum's gone too far towards over-helping them.
However, Dr. Parry, this has become a hot political issue. Rishi Sunak sees this issue as an opportunity to recalibrate his premiership and win the next election. Do you not think that Rishi Sunak's political ambitions could see movement on the issue?
Yeah, before I answer that, if you don't mind, Mark, I'll say to Mike, look, we've done a great job of keeping Germans out since 1940. You could say that's a real tick in the channel. We've kept them out. It's not the job of the Navy to keep migrants and refugees out. That's the job of our maritime agencies. They're just not doing the job well because they're not resourced to do it from a technical or a financial point of view. The issue, I would always want this country to be able to welcome refugees. What we haven't done is separated out the economic migrants from the refugees. It's as simple as that. To be a refugee, you just have to say you're one at the moment. And to your point about ID cards, I've just taken delivery of an Amazon package. I had to show an ID to actually have it. Now, you know, if we have to do it for that and for driving and for voting and all that sort of thing, you're absolutely right. We have to actually start saying to people, you've got to have an identity that is verifiable. And finally, to your point, Mark, the Conservative Party has said all along that it wants to be able to deal with the Channel crisis. I'm not going to criticise the Prime Minister for saying he's going to do it. I'm going to criticise the Prime Minister for the next election if he doesn't achieve anything. You know, at the end of the day, the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister have actually set their cap at this. They will be held to account for it by the country, and they need to deliver.
Chris Parry, always a privilege to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your wise thoughts on a potential summer migrant crisis in the Channel. Dr. Chris Parry, former high-ranking naval officer and a brilliant political commentator, let me tell you. Now, coming up, amid a lack of evidence that they work, is it time to consign masks to the dustbin of history? That's next.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back to Mark Dolan tonight. Now, the highly respected Professor of Evidence-Based Medicine at Oxford University, Carl Hennigan, along with top epidemiologist Tom Jefferson, have written a highly critical article in response to the UK Health Security Agency's review on the effectiveness of masks during the pandemic. Both scientists have cited some of the studies as being beyond poor or lacking the basics when it comes to the scientific method. They've also accused the government body of drawing conclusions based on cherry-picking and showcasing the data to suit the answer they wanted. There's a surprise. They go on to say, and I quote, "No one looked under the bonnet of these studies to see if they were fit for making effective policy." In the face of such poor quality evidence, opinions over what to do next, as opposed to the evidence, will continue to dominate the debate. Given that 3 years on from the outbreak of COVID and with opinions so divided, is it time to ditch masks once and for all and consign them to the dustbin of history, particularly in the light of a recent study which suggested that masks may even have been ineffective in stopping the spread of COVID in a hospital setting? To discuss this, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Colin Axon, Senior Lecturer in Mechanical Engineering at Brunel University in London. Brilliant to have you on the show, Dr. Axon. Welcome to Mark Dolan tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time. Given that 3 years on from the outbreak of COVID, and with opinions so divided, do you think that we need to move on from this policy of masking? Wouldn't we know after 3 years whether they work or don't?
This is actually quite a tricky question. I think, yes, we should move on. There is no clear evidence that there is any benefit or positive effect. The updated Cochrane review, which is the gold standard of reviewing evidence or medical evidence and medical studies, that came to the conclusion that, as you have stated, that nearly all studies were of very poor quality, did not reach a minimum threshold to be considered as strong evidence or even useful evidence. And so that report, which was led by Tom Jefferson, said that there's no clear signal, there's no clear effect. Some studies do say that there is some claim there's some effect, but those studies were of poor quality, and therefore the evidence is weak that there is any clear signal, any clear benefit. And it can seem to be quite confusing to say, well, there's weak evidence, and so someone will say, oh, that's evidence there is some effect. No, that isn't what it's saying. What it's actually saying, and Tom and his team have correctly said, that it's the evidence that is weak. So from my understanding of physics and engineering, of the materials used in masks and in the physics of airflow and ventilation, I would not expect to see a clear signal. Even the two very large supposedly randomized controlled studies that have been reported showed that there may have been some small effect, but was probably below a statistically valid or statistically strong standard to show that you could say that there was an effect. So the physics would indicate that you can't say that there is zero effect. That would be impossible to say, and that would not be correct to say. But if it is below a measurable effect, then one would clearly have to examine the harms and quantify them, not just list them out and say, well, maybe these harms could occur, but actually quantify them through studies. And this is what particularly Carl Hennigan has been saying for the last 3 years, that nobody has done this. And yet this balance between benefits and harms, which has to be made if there is no clear benefit, which is the case, there's no clear benefit, therefore the harms must be evaluated, absolutely must be.
Yes, I mean, Dr. Axe and I made headlines early in the pandemic chopping up a face mask on national radio because I was angry at the idea that you would mandate these face coverings in the absence of compelling data demonstrating that they would move the dial in terms of stopping COVID. You are a mechanical engineer, so could you illustrate in layman's terms the problem with face coverings as the proposed barrier to a virus like COVID-19?
Okay, so what we breathe out is obviously essentially all invisible. They're all very small particles, ranging from we breathe in and out with nitrogen. We breathe in the gases that make up the air. Those come in and out, and we breathe in oxygen. CO2 comes out, but the nitrogen comes in and goes straight back out again. And those are molecules, and those pass straight through almost all materials. And in fact, if they don't, you've got a big problem. The other things that we breathe out will be little bits of water vapor, little bits of nose lining, little bits of throat lining, etc. That is entirely normal. That happens all the time. If you are infectious and you've got some respiratory illness of any sort, then some of those particles that make up that virus will also be released. You'll breathe them out. And the single viral particle is very small and will pass through essentially all of the masks that are short of being an actual respirator. But we don't just breathe out single particles. They might come clumped together as a pair or 5, or perhaps one with a little bit of water vapour, a little bit of nose lining, etc. So there's a whole range of sizes of particles that we breathe out if we were infectious. And that is what is not really being thought about, because it is quite literally out of sight, out of mind. You can't see it. So it's too easy to say, well, oh, you're just breathing out gases, or you're just breathing out things that you can, droplets that you can see. You're not. There's nearly everything is very small and a bit bigger than molecules, but not as big as things that you can see, such as, say, something that's a width of a strand of hair. So there's this range of things. Now, the smallest stuff will pass through pretty much everything. The larger stuff, some of it will get stopped, some of it will get stuck for a little while and then get breathed back in, or then pushed out when next time you breathe out. Some of it might get dislodged, stick there for a little while and then get dislodged. All sorts of processes are going on. And that's why there's no simple answer to this. And that's why, in part, why the argument has persisted for the last 3 years, even though the actual empirical evidence that in the real world, used by real people every day, that evidence has not changed in more or less the last 20 years.
Well, absolutely. And of course, you're the expert, and I defer to your infinite scientific knowledge, Colin. But the bottom line is we have these real-world case studies now, don't we? Let's bring Mike Parry into this. We've got countries like Sweden who did not have mask mandates. We've got countries like Germany and Austria that had stricter mask mandates with supposedly better N95 masks and all the rest of it. It didn't seem to make a discernible difference in terms of the overall spread of the virus. Every Western country has had a comparable outcome, really. And here's my point, Mike Parry. I'm a libertarian. I believe in personal choice. Wear a mask if you want to. But even if they did work, I think it was wrong in the first place to mandate them.
Yeah, but you see, that's the problem, Mark. We're talking about hindsight here. Once the scientists had told us we're all going to have to wear masks, then the hair had been let loose, hadn't it? The hair was running.
Correct.
So the economy was already 2/3 closed down. The pubs were closed down. People were told not to go into work. Excuse me, work from home.
Do you mind wearing a mask? You spread your filthy germs in the studio.
Excuse me. So we were told, don't go to work, work from home and that kind of stuff. Now, if you wanted to go into a shop, there was somebody at the door saying you've got to wear a mask to come into this shop. So you didn't protest and say, I'm not wearing a mask, I'm making my personal protest here, take your argument up, and you've been proven largely to be right, that it was probably quite unnecessary. But in order to keep society running at the very reduced level it was running during the COVID pandemic lockdown, you had to wear a mask. And I was quite happy to. And quite honestly, for my own personal, peace of mind, if I got on a bus or there was nobody on trains, being on a bus or something like that, I put a mask on because I thought, look, I know I'm OK, but I don't know that the person standing 2 feet away from me is OK. I'm going to put the mask on.
Mike, I hear you very briefly. I've only got a couple of seconds, Colin, but this is my problem. I think we've got to get rid of this performative COVID theatre.
But it was hindsight.
Yeah.
Colin?
No, it wasn't hindsight. The evidence was solid for 20 years. So this was known, and the WHO advice was that they're not effective. And it was turned on its head for no good reason. And that's what Carl and Tom were digging into in that recent report of theirs, when they dissected and shredded what the UK HSA, how they had used the studies and picked bits and here and there and cherry-picked data and periods of time and what have you. And it was that report that turned everything on its head. In this
Colin, you've been the voice of reason during the pandemic, and you've clearly had a long day at the office, so thank you so much for making the time to join us.
Thank you very much.
There you go, Dr. Colin Axon and, of course, Mike Porky Parry, my Friday sidekick. Let me say that the government are very clear that those masks slowed the spread of COVID-19, protected the NHS and saved lives. That is their strong view and the view of the medical authorities throughout the pandemic. It's not my view, but hey, this show's all about opinions. Keep those coming, Mark, at gbnews.uk. Next up, we're going to talk about the BBC. After a humiliating Elon Musk interview, are the organisation guilty of misinformation and censorship? We'll speak to a comedy legend about that next.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith. Is that not the start of the slippery slope? It's very much so. And the big moral questions of the day. I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Mark Dolan tonight. I'll be dealing with Joe Biden in my big opinion at 9 o'clock. You won't want to miss it. Well, it was the car crash interview of the week, not sadly on this show, though we've had our moments. Tech entrepreneur and billionaire Twitter owner Elon Musk made mincemeat out of a BBC reporter who accused the social media boss of presiding over more hate speech on his social media network since he took over. Take a listen.
Must have at some point seen the for you hateful content. I'm asking for one example.
Right.
And you can't give a single one.
And I'm saying...
I say, sir, that you don't know what you're talking about.
Awkward. So are the BBC guilty of misinformation and censorship? Let's ask a man who was permanently suspended by Twitter for a less than controversial remark made about a trans person, though I'm pleased to say his Twitter account, @Glinner, has been reinstated following Musk's takeover. Yes, the genius comedy writer and co-creator of Father Ted, Black Books and The IT Crowd, among countless other hits, Graham Linehan joins me now. Hi, Graham.
Hey, Mark, I just have to quickly correct you there. I didn't get banned for coming after a trans person. I got banned for saying men aren't women, which is a much more general statement.
Well, thank you for the correction. And again, hardly an egregious remark, but enough to get you cancelled.
Yeah, and that's why I think Elon taking over Twitter is so exciting, because he's not just showing how the BBC has been captured. He's showing how, you know, the vast majority of kind of liberal left progressive news platforms have been captured. You know, we've had like about 5 years of uninterrupted propaganda telling us that you know, children can be born in the wrong body, that they need surgeries and drugs to cure themselves. And the BBC has been singing from this hymn sheet just like everyone else. So it's fantastic to see them challenged, you know.
Indeed. So you're a cracking writer, but you couldn't have scripted that exchange, could you, any better than what played out?
Yeah, it's interesting. Someone pointed out that the BBC seem to have no idea what people outside of their bubble actually think. You know, like when that journalist, I forget his name, but when he's talking about hate speech, a lot of the people who Elon let back on Twitter when he got back were feminists. Feminists were silenced for like 5 years because they didn't go along with gender ideology. And the BBC has been pushing gender ideology to such an extent that they have children's programs where they tell people it's possible to be born in the wrong body, and they tell children that there's more than 97 genders and all this stuff that is confusing and incoherent. And basically, what's happened is within the BBC, you know, and this is the case with institutions all over the UK. Within the BBC, it's the Pride Network who are controlling the discourse around this issue. And it means that, again, over the last 5 years, you rarely hear from the leading lights of the feminist movement, people like Maya Forstater, Helen Joyce. They just don't get invited onto these programs. And I asked someone about this, someone who worked at the BBC, and they said that one thing that is a major problem within the BBC are younger staffers simply pretending that the guests that they were asked to look up, like Maya or Helen or someone like this, just wasn't available. So there's only half a conversation going on about one of the most important issues that I think we've ever faced, because of course the stakes are so high, because you're talking about the well-being of children and the safeguarding of women, you know.
Of course. Now, Graham, you'll know that the BBC are not here to defend themselves, that they would argue that they make programming that's designed to be inclusive, including to trans people as well. Of course, there's two sides to every story. But the likes of the BBC, it strikes me that they're sceptical at best about the Elon Musk takeover of Twitter, because they don't want ordinary people to have a voice.
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly it. And they also want to place a border around certain conversations. You know, I mean, obviously, I keep going on about it, but my interest is feminism and what's happening with you know, children who are being placed on puberty blocking drugs and all this. I think it's the most important issue facing us today. I think we're actually looking at a huge mental and health crisis in the next few years. And the BBC has been spending the last 5 or 6 years simply pretending that this debate doesn't exist. So I've always been a firm believer in the BBC. I've always thought they were kind of a jewel in the crown of UK culture. But for the first time, I've been thinking of not paying my TV license simply because I will not pay for the grooming of a nation. And that's essentially what's happening. So Elon coming in and exposing this is exactly what's needed at this moment. You know, we have had a kind of a, what would you call it, a blackout on information from outlets like the BBC, The Guardian, The Independent, The Metro. These publications are have essentially turned into propagandist publications. And I think that hopefully now that Elon is standing up to all this, that it will open out the conversation and we'll be able to have discussions that we should have been able to have about 5 years ago, you know. But unfortunately, people like me and Kelly J and Helen Joyce and Maya Forstater have been able to be portrayed as bigots because there are no adults in the BBC who, you know, will have this debate. Like, basically, we're talking about a massive social change. And the BBC thought they could just push it through without any discussion. And it's long overdue. And you know, to give GB News its due, you're the only channel that has been regularly platforming feminists. The BBC just pretends they don't exist. So I just think it's they're negligent in their duties. They're supposed to be the channel we turn to have these important conversations. But again, as I say, they simply pretend that the conversation doesn't exist.
Well, I'm delighted that you're back on Twitter, and you've always got a platform here on GB News. Mike Porky Parry, just a few seconds left. But you're one of the most experienced and high-profile journalists in the country. Have you ever seen such a feeble piece of journalism in your life than the one between Elon Musk and this cub
James
reporter?
Clayton.
Yeah.
James Clayton. Graham, fantastic analysis there of the BBC, what it means to us all and all that. If you're a reporter and you think you come in with your lefty liberal views in your head because you live in a bubble where you think nobody can possibly dispute what you think because I know I'm right and anybody who disagrees with me is not a very nice person. But then if you come up against one of the brightest men in the world, which clearly Elon Musk is, because he's the second richest man in the world, and you try to just flam your way through, and Elon Musk says, could you give me some evidence?
No chance.
Could you give me some specifics?
A complete
You're dead.
disaster.
You're dead.
Graham Linehan, Mike Parry, thank you for a brilliant debate. Next up, can you reverse type 2 diabetes? And in my big opinion, Joe Biden. That's next.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching. Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes & Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News. The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel. It's 9 o'clock and this is Mark Dolan Tonight. It's great to be back. I missed you. I hope you had a cracking Easter. In my big opinion, my first on-air reaction to Joe Biden's visit to the UK. I'll be asking, does Britain need Donald Trump back in the White House? In the big story, with 5 million Brits now suffering from type 2 diabetes, we'll speak to the revolutionary NHS doctor who'll be telling me how you can reverse it. My Mark Meets guest is the extraordinary British soldier who consumed radioactive water during the Bravo 20 mission escape from Iraqi forces. He tells his incredible story. Big guests, big stories, and always big opinions. A lively 2 hours to come, but first the headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Mark, thank you, and good evening to you. The top story tonight on GB News at just after 9 o'clock. RCN nurses will stage another round of strikes after rejecting a pay offer from the government, the same offer which Unison nurses overwhelmingly accepted. Royal College of Nursing members voted to reject a 5% pay rise this year, as well as a cash payment for the last year. The action, running from 8 o'clock in the evening on the 30th of April for 48 hours, will, for the first time, involve nurses working in emergency departments, intensive care and cancer care. Unison announced today that its NHS members had accepted the 5% offer. Paediatric nurse Olivia Princewell told GB News earlier the government could have offered more.
Junior doctors work for incredibly long hours. So do nurses in conditions that are absolutely ridiculous. To them come to work and be happy with their job. Okay, that's not even safe for the patient. So what we're trying to do here, and I believe that's what everyone is trying to achieve, is come to a situation where there is a sort of agreement between us nurses, the junior doctors, and also the government to feel like when you're going to work, you're safe.
Meanwhile, civil servants will hold fresh strikes after the government announced a pay rise of between 4.5% and 5%. The PCS union's General Secretary describing that as insulting and completely inadequate. So staff will walk out in May and June across government departments and in areas like the Met Office. Now, the US President Joe Biden has been brought to tears after a chance meeting at an Irish church with the priest who performed the last rites on his son, Beau. Father Frank O'Grady performed the sacrament for Beau Biden, who died of brain cancer in 2015. The president visited Knock Shrine in County Mayo as part of his final day of arrangements. It brings Mr Biden's 4-day trip to Ireland to a close, which the former Taoiseach Enda Kenny has described as the longest presidential visit ever to the island. And lastly, a European rocket is on its way to Jupiter, 4.1 billion miles away, to explore whether or not it supports life. It's going to take more than 8 years to get there. It's a 6-ton spacecraft called JUICE. It'll spend around 3 years using its instruments to investigate whether the planet's 3 moons can support life in its oceans. It's a £14 billion mission. If it goes well, JUICE should reach Jupiter by July 2031. On TV, online, DAB+ radio and on the TuneIn app, this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
My thanks to Polly Middlehurst. Isn't it great to have her back on the show? She returns at 10 o'clock. Welcome to Mark Dolan Tonight. In my big opinion, my first on-air reaction to Joe Biden's visit to the UK, I'll be asking, does Britain need Donald Trump back in the White House? In the big story, with 5 million Brits now suffering type 2 diabetes, we'll speak to the revolutionary NHS doctor who'll be telling me how you can reverse it. My Mark Meets guest is the extraordinary British soldier who consumed radioactive water during the Bravo 20 mission escape from Iraqi forces. In my take at 10, Bud Light are now crying into their beer as sales of their iconic lager have collapsed faster than one of their customers when they've had too many. And would you be willing to separate your rubbish into 7 different bins, as proposed by the government? We'll be asking the Queen of Clean, Channel 4's Kim Woodburn. Plus, Mark Dolan Tonight is the home of the papers, with tomorrow's front pages from 10:30. with three top pundits who haven't been told what to say and who don't follow the script. Tonight, Emma Wolf, David Oldroyd-Bolt and Lizzie Zeta. Tonight, I'll be asking the pundits, as a male blood donor was turned away for refusing to say if he's pregnant or not, has the world finally gone mad? As frozen food sales boom in this country, is Britain being priced out of healthy eating? And is it wrong for the lotto rapist to be allowed to keep his £7 million? Plus your emails, especially the spicy ones, mark@gbnews.uk. And this show has a golden rule, a bulletproof rule. We don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it. Let's get to work, and we start with my big opinion. Now, the tongue-tied leader of the free world, Joe Biden, had only been in the British Isles for what felt like 10 minutes. But it was long enough for a man who needs to be reminded on a daily basis that he's actually president to make yet another almighty gaffe. The US Commander-in-Chief, and a man barely in command of his own bladder, mistakenly said that the Irish rugby team of 2016 beat the hell out of the Black and Tans. Mr. Biden was referring to the New Zealand All Blacks. Take a listen.
See this tie I have with a shamrock on it? This was given to me by one of these guys right here. Was a hell of a rugby player, and they beat the hell out of the Black and Tans. Oh, God.
The Black and Tans were constables recruited into the Royal Irish Constabulary as reinforcements during the Irish War of Independence. Not a rugby team. And this is the guy, don't forget, who's got access to the nuclear codes. Time to build a wall shelter or something like that. Stock up on candles, cash and tinned meat. We're all in trouble. 2 weekends ago, this show broke the internet with 1 million views on all platforms with this big opinion piece about Joe Biden. Treatment of King Charles is a shocker, and millions of proud Americans will be ashamed at their president's behaviour in not turning up. I know most Americans would want their great country to be represented for this massive moment in history, the installation of a new British king following on from the iconic reign of Elizabeth II. Now, it's taken the press a while, but they finally caught up, with all and sundry acknowledging Biden's problem with Britain, even forcing a nervous denial from the White House, as reported in The Telegraph this week. Of course, Biden has a problem with this country. The proof is in the pudding. He won't do interviews with the BBC because they're British. He's delayed talks in relation to a US-UK free trade deal. He sided with the EU over the Northern Ireland Protocol. This week, he discarded the UK flag whilst travelling in his famous Beast presidential vehicle in Northern Ireland. And of course, shockingly, he decided to skip King Charles's coronation, with the only thing in his diary more pressing, it seems, being his afternoon nap. Don't give me any of that guff about how no US president has ever attended a coronation. The last coronation was in the 1950s. Times have changed. We live in a 24/7 news environment, and any president worth their salt who valued this country would attend. I've never been a great Trump cheerleader, and he clearly has profound flaws. But if he were in the White House right now, the ink would likely be drying on a US-UK trade deal, and the famously Anglophile Donald Trump would be at the coronation with bells on. And whilst Trump backed Brexit all the way, both his predecessor Barack Obama and Joe Biden have always raged about it. Biden having previously said, "We preferred a different outcome." Well, he's now taken another swipe at our exit from the bloc, this week saying the UK's departure created complex challenges. Correction, an intransigent EU has created complex challenges, Mr. President. Why do the likes of Biden and Obama hate Brexit? Well, because it represents people power, and it represents Britain's decision to strike out and become an independent sovereign nation. We had the cheek, the temerity to choose our own destiny as a country, to go our own way and to push back on the technocratic and corporate global elite, much of which is headquartered in Brussels. It breaks my heart to say it, but under the leadership of Joe Biden, the special relationship is on the rocks. Britain needs a new partner in the White House, someone that actually loves us. Now, that's my view, but what's yours? Mark at gbnews.uk. I'll get to your email shortly. Reacting to my big opinion, three of the top pundits in the country, author and political commentator Emma Wolfe, historian and writer David Oldroyd-Bolt, and journalist and broadcaster Lizzie Zeta. Lizzie, a bad week for Anglo-American relations.
Yeah, it was a pretty bad week, but, you know, we have to remember certain things. In my humble opinion, Brexit was a disaster. It's cost the country...
Too soon to say.
Well...
You need to give it at least 10 years. Oh, Lizzie, we've got an issue with your microphone, which is very unusual for GB News, but we're just going to get that sorted whilst I go to Emma Wolfe. We want to hear what you've got to say. But, Emma, what's your appraisal of Joe Biden's visit to Northern Ireland and the Republic?
Well, Northern Ireland, he was there for, 17, 18 hours, and most of that he was asleep in a hotel room. So, I mean, for once, Mark, I agree with you. Word perfect. Everything you said, I say...
Well, that's a rarity. Can I get that? I get that tattooed on my left wrist.
Would I have voted for Donald Trump? No, I probably wouldn't have. Would I?
I'm going to interrupt you because we are in the sort of situation of a problem with everyone's microphone. That's right, a mini crisis on Mark Dolan tonight. Emma, can we could ask you what you had for breakfast, which is what they do in the industry. Great. Would you believe it? We've put 10p in the meter and we can now hear you.
OK, lovely.
So you share some of my views from the big opinion. Go on.
No, I agree with every word you said, unusually. Would I have voted for Donald Trump? No, I wouldn't have voted for Donald Trump. Probably not. Would I have voted for Joe Biden? Probably, definitely not. But I just wish we would butt out and stop ridiculing this whole thing. If Donald Trump gets in 2024, I wish we would just respect the will of the American people. Millions of Americans voted for Donald Trump, and I'm sick to death of everybody laughing at the Americans. And similarly, I wish Biden and Trump and Obama would stay out of our affairs in terms of the EU, so in terms of Brexit. So, frankly, Joe Biden seems an absolute joke to me, but to everybody else, he seems a preferable choice to Donald Trump.
OK, now I will come to David, but Lizzie, you were in full flow there. So what's your view? You were horribly censored, so let rip, go for it.
Well, look, first of all, Joe Biden is Irish, and he's probably a Republican, and he's Catholic. So I'm not surprised that he's taken down the flag when he was going into Northern Ireland, etc., etc. He feels a great affinity with the country. Personally, I didn't find it offensive. I mean, my husband's Irish, I know the whole story, and I'm also raised Catholic. But on the other hand, it's not great that he's not coming to the King's coronation. We have to ask ourselves the reason why. Now, could it be that we look to America and the rest of the world like a load of, squabbling fools with our closest neighbour, the European Union, and also the rest of Europe? It's not a good look. It's not working. And it's something that deeply worries me. I absolutely agree with what Emma said, that there's so much division and diversity within all politics today. It's become like a two-person show, and we're all fighting. We need to listen more to each other.
Indeed. I mean, David, I've never been a cheerleader for Donald Trump, but I do think he would be a greater friend of Britain in the White House.
He would be, I suppose, but it's a deeply depressing thought that out of 380 million people, the best that the Americans can come up with as a choice is Donald Trump
or
Joe Biden. And that the best the Democratic and Republican parties can provide us with are these two gerontocratic men, one of whom's a raging egomaniac and one of whom's clearly in the grips of dementia. On Joe Biden's being Irish, he's got more ancestry from England than he does from Ireland. I'm afraid it's a typical trope of the Democratic Party that they wrap themselves in the green flag to get the Irish-American vote, which is substantial and gives a lot of funding. Never forget that the Americans were great funders of the IRA during the Troubles.
Correct. And, of course, Joe Biden this week pictured in a selfie with Jerry Adams.
Yes. There's very little sensitivity on the American left to both sides of the Unionist versus Republican argument, I'm afraid. And when it comes to the Americans looking at us and seeing us squabbling with ourselves, well, what happens when they look at France and see a nation on fire with riots throughout the country? What happens when they look at Germany and see a nation riven by 20 years of bad policy towards Russia and now in an energy crisis? What happens when they look at the Netherlands and see a nation that's just voted to euthanize children? What happens when they look at Belgium, where they're killing people of all ages because they happen to be a bit depressed? I think there are problems all across Europe. To say that the Americans look at us and find us uniquely abhorrent is a view I don't share, and I don't think it's one that the vast majority of Americans would share.
And to say that it's not a snub for Joe Biden not to attend the coronation is an absolute joke. Of course it's a huge snub. It's irrelevant that, as you say, presidents don't traditionally attend the coronation. As you say, the last one was in the 70 years? 1953, exactly.
Spot the historian.
Frankly, I was saying the 1950s.
3 points to old Troy Bolt.
But it's not tradition of any sort. It is a snub. This is going to be one of the biggest global events. It's going to be televised. It's going to be watched by millions of people around the world, just like the Queen's funeral was. For Joe Biden not to attend, and yet he spent 4 days touring around the routes of Irish cemeteries and things, which is all well and good. If he's well enough to do that, he's well enough to pop back on his, Air Force One and attend the coronation.
The Democratic Party have a chip on their shoulder about Britain, about our colonial past, even though we ended slavery decades before the Americans attempted to do. Of course, in the 50s and 60s, they had effective apartheid before the civil rights movement, and yet they wagged their fingers at us in terms of our history, our disgraceful blood-stained history. And, of course, they hate Brexit. The worst thing that could happen, Lizzie Zeta, is another 4 years of Joe Biden in the White House.
Well, I don't think that he's the best president. I completely agree with what's been said that, unfortunately, of all the huge population that America has, we have, Trump on one hand, who seems like an out-of-control nutter, and then we have Biden, who seems as if he's too old to do the job.
Trump, not perfect. The lesser of two evils for the next 4 years?
No, I don't think so. He's too divisive. He's too dangerous. No, I don't think so.
OK, briefly, David, Trump in the White House, the lesser of two evils in relation to Joe Biden?
If it's a choice between him and Biden, yes, but I'd prefer it to be Ron DeSantis.
Emma Wolfe, you've got the casting vote.
Yeah, I'd prefer Trump to Biden.
Crumbs, a mic drop debate. What's your view? Mark at gbnews.uk.
It's not our decision.
The topic. Well, no, of course not, and that's a fair point. But what do you think? Because this is about the British national interest, something that I think is at the bottom of Joe Biden's list. Coming up next in the big story, can you reverse diabetes? I'll speak to 2 top experts who say you can. That's next.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Well, a big reaction to my big opinion. I think that Donald Trump would be the lesser of two evils in the White House in terms of the British national interest. We need a new partner in Washington. Joe Biden has a problem with the United Kingdom. What's your view, Mark, at gbnews.uk? Phil says, hi, Mark, I'm an American who has lived in the UK since '88. I'll always be an American first, but when I walk outside my door, I work to make the society I live in a better place. We'll never see a relationship such as what Reagan and Thatcher had, but the Biden administration is downright dismissive of the UK. Chris says, hi, Mark, how's this for Irish? Sleepy Joe Biden is a feckin' Egypt. Well, Chris, I don't speak Gaelic, but that sounds quite rude. How about this from James? Hi, Mark, I'm an Anglo-American. We're deeply ashamed of Biden and his puppeteer, Obama. The Marxist US government is destroying the USA. President Trump was the best we've had. Thank you for that. Keep those emails coming. I've been asking on Twitter, does Britain need Donald Trump back in the White House? 76% have said yes, 24% said no. It's time now for the big story, in which we tackle a major news issue of the day. And a report published by the charity Diabetes UK shows that Britain has reached an unfortunate milestone, with 5 million people now living with diabetes, 90% of whom are suffering type 2 diabetes, which, unlike type 1, is linked to diet, lifestyle and conditions like obesity. Well, joining me now are two men who have some good news for you. They believe that your type 2 diabetes or that of your friends or family could potentially be reversed or sent into remission without the need for medication. How so? Well, Dr. David Unwin is an NHS GP who has tackled the diabetes of scores of his patients and dramatically reduced their waistlines as well. His revolutionary method was serialised in the Daily Mail newspaper, demonstrating startling results for readers. I'm also delighted to welcome a man who has been the perpetual voice of reason during the COVID-19 pandemic, calling out the madness of lockdowns and mask mandates. Ivor Cummins, a biochemical engineer who previously made his name in the public eye as a vociferous proponent for the low-carbohydrate lifestyle. Gentlemen, welcome to Mark Dolan tonight. Dr. Unwin, can type 2 diabetes be reversed?
Definitely, only I would call it remission. I would call it remission because that's just a reminder that if you go back to the lifestyle that created that type 2 diabetes in the first place, the condition will come back. What we found, so I'm a GP from the north of England, and we really got fed up waiting for some sort of solution to the epidemic of type 2 diabetes. And we decided 10 years ago that we'd do something about it. And we've been pioneering an approach where we encourage people to cut back on the foods that put up the blood sugar, because it's this increase in blood sugar that does the damage over time. And we find that of the people who engage with improving their diet, 50% of them are so proud and delighted because they're getting drug-free remission of their diabetes. And that's actually saving the practice money because we're spending £68,000 less every year on the diabetes drug budget. And we've been doing that for years now.
So
we feel that... Yes, go ahead.
Dr. Unwin, sorry to interrupt you. What's in and what's out? It's not a complicated way of eating, is it?
No, it's about looking at your diet and working out what puts up your blood sugar. So obviously sugar itself is going to do that. But I think the thing that catches many people out are starchy carbs which, although not being sugar, digest down into surprising amounts of sugar. So these are things like bread, breakfast cereals, rice, potatoes, these things which put your blood sugar up. So our patients eat other things instead of starchy carbs and sugary foods.
So what are you eating instead?
Right. So I've been on this diet for 10 years. So I'm basing my meals on protein. So that's fish, eggs, cheese, meat, that kind of thing. And then I have loads of green veg. So I'm replacing the white stuff with green stuff. So I eat far more green veg and hardly any white starchy carbs.
Now, Ivor Cummins, it's great to have you back on the show. It seems the root of the explosion in type 2 diabetes is in relation to dietary guidelines issued by most governments over the last few decades. Where, in your view, have they been going wrong?
Yeah, Mark. Well, essentially, the dietary guidelines were well-intentioned, but unfortunately, they got some things wrong. So David just described what he's eating, and essentially, the dietary guidelines said that meat and eggs and cheese were kind of bad. So they made a mistake there. And unfortunately, what really went wrong is the food industry jumped onto these scientific guidelines and said, OK, we'll give you cheap vegetable oils and cheap starches, the white stuff, refined grains and sugars, and we'll supply you with the so-called healthy foods. So BMJ a few years ago had a paper, and they showed that 60% of UK calories are now coming from ultra-processed foods. And that's an astonishing amount of kind of toxic food stuff to be eating, obviously. But I always say the devil's triad is the root cause of diabetes and much chronic disease. And that's sugar, refined grains, refined carbs, and vegetable or seed oils. So essentially, that's what makes up most of the ultra-processed food in your supermarket. And that's most of the calories that, unfortunately, the humans are eating.
Now, Ivor, what would you say to those arguing that this is quackery or even dangerous, particularly if this diet involves eating more saturated fat? People might lose weight, but they're going to have a massive heart attack, aren't they?
Well, you see, this is the age-old problem because mistaken paradigms have taken hold now and been supported massively by industry. So I think everyone will agree with what I just said about sugar, refined grains and seed oils from factories. And to not eat those, you have to eat what Dr. Unwin eats, meat, fish and eggs and vegetables, meat and 2 veg. The suggestion that saturated fat from natural, wholesome, human evolutionary foods is problematic is kind of absurd. And I think we're increasingly seeing now more and more publications beginning to call this out. The quackery is the false paradigm of 50 years ago that sadly became established in the nutrition and health community.
Indeed. A good friend of the show, Dr. Ken Berry, who'll be familiar to both of you, told me that when he was younger, he was putting on weight, he was unfit. So he went back to the medical textbooks and he looked up exactly what to do to lose weight and be healthier. And he gained weight. David, it's time to challenge the orthodoxy, isn't it? Why aren't more NHS GPs replicating your success?
That's a very good question. I mean, why wasn't I doing it before? And I think I was exhausted. I was tired out. And I was busily doing what I was trained to do, which was use medication. Now medication does have a part to play, but I wasn't thinking about the actual cause of type 2 diabetes. And if we're going to treat this condition, we need to think what's causing it and do the opposite. So, I mean, what sparked me into action was we've had a 9-fold increase in the number of people with type 2 diabetes in the same practice since I was a young man. And this is another epidemic, another pandemic. I think it is. It's the ultra-processed food. And I think it's it's difficult to do something differently. We were pioneers in this, but now other GPs are actually doing it. And the Royal College of General Practitioners has published an e-learning module free to every GP in the country on how to do this. So there is hope, but I am disappointed it's taking longer than I thought it would. And I'm just hoping that doctors listening to this at least are going to think about why not just cut back the foods that put up blood sugar.
David, last time we spoke, you said you were close to resigning as a GP, retiring because it was so hopeless. Your patients were getting fatter and more diabetic. They've cut the carbs. Tell me how transformative it has been for your patients. Tell me about the difference you've seen in their lives and in their health.
In every clinic I do, I'm seeing people coming in to shake my hand or give me a hug. They're so amazed, so proud. They've lost weight, they feel better, they've come off medication. They never expected to feel better. They saw type 2 diabetes as a chronic deteriorating condition. And I can't tell you how brilliant it is to be celebrating with them that they've come off medication, they've lost weight, their blood pressure's better. And just to answer what you said before, we've actually been studying the lipid profiles, the cholesterol of all the people who've gone low carb, and the lipid profiles have actually improved. There are less cardiovascular risk now than when they started. So the whole thing's just cheerful fun. They can't get rid of me.
Well, look, I'm going to give details about how to find out more about your work. Ivor, before you go, you've been heroic throughout the pandemic, and you've been calling out mainstream scientists and medical professionals pushing for debatable lockdowns, masking and vaccine mandates. You're an engineer. You've just crunched the numbers. You've looked at the data. It didn't add up to you. You're now raising questions about public health policies of mainstream scientists in regards to nutrition and cardiovascular health. What's your appraisal of the reputation of mainstream science, given the fact that you disagree with most of it?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned earlier or alluded to, mainstream science was kind of captured, but over many, many decades. There's no conspiracy theory. It's a kind of an enormous groupthink that just grew from a powerful paradigm, and it made sense, and there was a confluence of interests, the food companies, the nutrition, education companies. It's just a sad story. So mainstream now is funded by kind of governments or pharmaceutical industry or food industry, a lot of the advertising. And as a result, you know, the message tends to flow from those sources. And that's just the situation we're in. I might add that my record for remission of diabetes personally was an internal medicine specialist doctor in Denver in March 2020. I met him and he ran up and hugged me. I didn't know him. And using insulin measurements after getting myself in Dr. Gerber's book and switching to real foods, meat, fish and eggs and vegetables, in 10 days his blood insulin showed him as non-diabetic. Now I hasten to add, blood insulin will show you a lot faster than blood glucose and other measures of type 2 diabetes. So he had a speedy measurement. But 10 days he switched from high insulin type 2 diabetes to normal insulin, technically non-type 2 diabetic.
Ivor Cummins' brilliant podcast is called The Fat Emperor, which covers all aspects of health and science. Find him on YouTube as well, or on Twitter @Fat Emperor. Meanwhile, Dr. David Unwin can be found @LowCarbGP on Twitter, or search Dr. David Unwin online for his recipes and articles, which are featured in The Guardian, The Mail and the Diabetes UK website. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. A deeply inspiring and positive conversation. It goes without saying that if you've got concerns about your health, or if you're thinking of changing your diet, or are seeking guidance in relation to type 2 diabetes, always consult your doctor first. Although if you're lucky, it will be Dr. David Unwin. Coming up next with the Pundit is giving small children a smartphone child abuse, as a male blood donor was turned away for refusing to say if he's pregnant or not. Has the world gone mad? And with frozen food sales booming, is Britain being priced out of healthy eating? All of that's next with the Pundits.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith. Is that not the start of the slippery slope?
It's very much so.
And the big moral questions of the day. I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Yeah.
Let's crack through some of the big, most compelling stories of the day with my top pundits tonight, author and political commentator Emma Wolfe, historian and writer David Oldroyd-Bolt, and journalist and broadcaster Lizzie Zita. Now, the serial sex offender Orworth Hoare was serving life for a sex attack when he won a £7 million lotto in 2004. And only now has he been granted access to his fortune after a 15-year legal battle. The daughter of one of his victims has urged him to donate his cash to charity, just like her mother did with her compensation. So is it wrong for the lotto rapist to hang on to his $7 million? David?
I think it shows a great lack of judgment and taste on his part, but then he's a serial rapist, so you wouldn't really expect it. It's a really tricky moral problem because he has a legal right to it, and I believe in the right to property. If we remove that because we dislike someone and their actions, then we start to go down a rather tricky moral passage. However, in this instance, it sticks in the craw that a man of his obvious evil should have such an enormous amount of money after he's inflicted such suffering on people. I mean, it was a really conflicting question. He has a legal right to it. Does he have a moral right to it? No.
Emma?
What is a prisoner doing being able to play the lotto anyway? He won it while he was serving life for these vile sex attacks.
And this was the argument.
I think we have a real problem.
This was the argument of the authorities in withholding the cash.
What, and now he's been granted it. But what was he doing playing the lotto anyway? It was like the killer of that lovely little Liverpudlian girl, Olivia Pratt-Bell.
Oh, yeah.
Who refused to appear in court for the sentencing. Who's refusing to appear in court? He should have been taken to court in the same way that they can refuse to go to prison and they put in prison. who gave him the right to refuse to appear at his sentencing?
And to have his diva moment.
To have his diva moment and say that I'm not interested, I don't care, basically, and to utterly to show such disrespect to the family.
Well, I wonder whether the argument against him getting the cash is that he purchased this lottery ticket whilst convicted as a rapist and whilst serving time.
Well, look, I think that the law needs to change. I think that if you are incarcerated for a crime, then you should not be able to win these large sums of money.
And surely if you do, it's null and void.
It should be part of the sentence. It's
null and void.
It's anathema. It's ridiculous. It should go back into the pot or it should be donated to charity. It's absolutely ridiculous and crackers that he is allowed to hang on to this money.
And the woman who was attacked by him, one of these women, gave all the earnings.
Yes.
She eventually took him to court, and after a long, decades-long battle, this elderly woman, donated all that money to good causes, to charities.
Yes.
Yeah, and of course this...
and there he is, living in a luxury property now with this £7 million fortune.
Well, this evil, twisted scumbag, he's also been on a retainer of £8,000 a month whilst he's been fighting these court cases.
And it's not
nice work if you can get it.
It's not the first time that it's happened. There have been other instances where rapists and murderers have won large sums of money. It should just be against the law. It should not happen.
Well, speaking of bonkers and crackers, a male GP has been denied from donating blood after he refused to confirm whether or not he was pregnant. I kid you not, the Scottish National Blood Transfusion Service says the question had been introduced a year ago for donor safety, with everyone expected to confirm whether they were pregnant or had been recently pregnant, regardless of their sex.
Are you pregnant? Are you?
No, I've just got a beer belly.
No, he's tested it earlier. No, absolutely fine.
Lizzie, I need some help with this one.
I just don't get it. I really don't. The lunatics are running.
And this guy could have unusual rare blood, which is now not going to be in the gift of the NHS because he wouldn't answer.
We desperately need blood donation.
Is this just unique to Scotland? Or is it
well, I do
also
think
the same
that I do wonder, Lizzie, whether Scotland is the most woke country in Europe now, outside of Canada.
They don't refer to women in their guidance. They refer to people who menstruate.
How does that make you feel as an official,
as a woman?
woman?
I think all of this is very offensive. Actually,
it is.
This thing about chest feeding and people who menstruate. What is wrong with calling women women? Why are we being erased?
No, you've got to stick with the script. You're a cis woman, OK?
I'm not a cis woman, and I'm not going to confirm my pronouns. I was born female, and I'll stay female, but I don't need to confirm that.
Well, look, David, isn't the point that there could be a biological female who just feels they're in a male body and they've transitioned and they identify as male now and they're pregnant, and all the NHS are trying to do is to accommodate someone like that? Surely that's a good thing.
No, it's not. This is a denial of truth. And this is all that's happening here. This is a denial of straightforward truth that you cannot change sex. You may change gender and you can identify as what you like, but you are always a man and you are always a woman from the moment you were born until the moment you die, whatever your outside appearance. And I think it is offensive, but moreover, it just plays into the narrative that truth is a malleable and subjective matter. It is not. It is a matter of biological fact. It's offensive to women. It's dangerous because the NHS isn't getting blood it needs. I'm glad this doctor did this to point out the true absurdity of it, and I hope that the people of Scotland are starting to realise how mad their country has become under the aegis of under the mad governance of the SNP. And they get rid of them next time, because this cannot be allowed to continue. This absolute denial of truth is bad for a nation.
British shoppers, meanwhile, are switching from fresh to frozen food to try to keep down their spending during the cost of living crisis. Shoppers are turning down the frozen aisles, with sales of ready meals, pizzas and chips increasing by 2.6%. So is Britain being priced out of healthy eating? What's your view on frozen food, David?
Frozen vegetables can be really good. They trap a great many nutrients that are lost in the transportation of fresh vegetables. I've never bought the argument that it is expensive to cook good fresh food, ever. It's much more expensive to buy ready meals, to buy chips and things like that, than it is to go and buy vegetables and make a soup, or to buy cheap cuts of meat and make large amounts of good, nutritious food.
But the ready meals are quick and it's all the kids will eat.
Well, I don't take that argument. If people, the first point is that people don't know how to cook, I think, a lot of the time because they haven't had the education. This is a failure of family and of the education system, because the knowledge has been lost over generations now, 2-3 generations of easy to access, easy to prepare, but very unnutritious and very bad food.
Lizzie?
Well, look, I think that they are pushing the frozen food because maybe people haven't got enough money to buy the fresh kind. I don't think that you can ever replace good food. And my research tells me that DEHA in the plastic and also BPA in the plastic leaches into the food. Now, I'm not being snobby.
What, is that from frozen food?
Well, it's from the plastic that the food is stored in. I look at it and I think, that can't be good. Look, sometimes I buy frozen veg because it's good to have it in the back of the fridge. But I think fresh is always best. And I think that really, during these times, we should be trying to grow our own vegetables. Even if you grow a few tomatoes,
well, that's a nice idea.
Nutritious.
I mean, Emma, you've got a young son. Is it hard to get him to eat fresh food? The kids are hoovering up the frozen snacks, aren't they?
No, kids are hoovering up junk food, packets of crisps and things like that. Of course, my son isn't doing that. But I think it's been a scandal for many, many decades in this country that junk food is much, much cheaper. Calorie for calorie, you can buy a lot more. You can get a bag of, multi-pack of crisps, 8 packets of crisps for £1 in the supermarket. But if you want to buy organic, fresh fruit and vegetables, that is expensive. That's the really shocking thing in this country, that it is cheaper to feed your kids junk than it should be.
Is there a snobbery about frozen food, though?
There
Given
is
the
a
fact that
snobbery.
a lot of
There is
frozen
a snobbery,
food...
and I would disagree.
I love Iceland. It's a great shop.
It is.
And a
It's
lot
got
of the gear
plenty.
they sell, I think, is really quite healthy.
Of course it is. And actually, Lizzie's wrong. Lots of vegetables which have been sitting in the supermarket, as David says, in the transportation...
They can freeze the nutrients, yes.
Yeah, you freeze it a lot quicker, much sooner.
It comes down to lack of education.
There you go.
What about all the plastic that it's wrapped in, though? That
There you
really
go.
concerns me.
Another thing to worry about. What's your view? Mark at gbnews.uk. Next up, it's Mark Meets, and it's a scorcher. See you in 2.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News. The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway, Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel. Yes, it's time for Mark Meets Tonight, the heroic soldier famous for the Bravo 2-0 mission against Iraqi forces in the first Iraq War. And of course, now best-selling author Chris Ryan. During the Gulf War, Ryan was a team member of the ill-fated 8-man SAS patrol with a call sign Bravo 2-0, stationed between Baghdad and northwest Iraq to gather intelligence and help out in destroying Scud missiles. They were compromised and feared execution. They were forced to head to Syria on foot. Ryan walked almost 200 miles to the Syrian border. This march made SAS history as the longest escape and evasion by an SAS trooper or any other soldier. During his escape, Ryan suffered injuries from drinking water contaminated with nuclear waste. In 91, Ryan was awarded the coveted Military Medal in recognition of gallant and distinguished services in the Gulf. Chris Ryan, welcome to Mark Dolan Tonight.
Hi, Mark. How are you?
I'm very well. What a story to recount. You've clearly had to display amazing courage. Were there moments when you genuinely feared for your life?
I would say every day, every night, Mark. It wasn't the fear of being caught or the Iraqi army. It was the weather. It was the coldest winter Iraq had ever had for 30 years. Temperatures were below 0 during the day and at night. And to back that up, sadly, 2 of my colleagues died of hypothermia. I lay next to one of the guys, Vince Phillips, a very brave soldier, who passed away during the night. It was horrendous. And those 7 days and 8 nights, obviously I had to lie up during the day, and it was absolutely freezing and there was no sleep. I would try and nod off, but basically woke up, shaking. And that's your body telling you if you don't wake up, you're going to die. During the nights, the only respite I had was walking 40 kilometers, which kept me, reasonably warm. But during the day, them 12 hours lying and hiding were horrendous.
How does that level of peril and privation change you?
Well, it certainly makes you think as you get older, because I'm a man of a certain age now at 60, and when I look back, or when I come back to the UK and visit the regimental graveyard, and I see, for instance, Bob Consiglio, I still see him as a young guy. He was the youngest member in that patrol. And Bob actually sacrificed his life to save 4 members of the patrol. And he was also given the military medal, but I believe Bob should have been given the VC. He went to ground and he kept the enemy at bay for over 40 minutes before, sadly, he was shot and killed, but allowed the other guys to escape. So when you put it into context, I mean, you can say, I'm having a bad day, but time is a softener. And it's very hard even for me to, think back on that week. I was a qualified guide. I've worked in some of the coldest places on earth, but that week in Iraq was certainly the worst week I've had.
And you faced execution. Does the memory of that haunt you? You've talked about suffering post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah, Mark, that's a good point. the only way I can describe it was whilst I was on the run in Iraq, my goal was to get across that border into Syria. And, I was facing the weather, I was facing Iraqi troops on a nightly basis. When I got into Syria, I thought I was safe. That was, the final goal. Actually, when I got into Syria, any mental problems that I succumbed to or had was at that point. Because I was at a low ebb, I probably hadn't slept at all for 6 days. I hadn't ate or drank very little. I handed myself over to the police, and I should have been safe. And because of maybe their loyalties to their cousins in Iraq, they messed around with me. They held a mock execution. They told me I was going to Baghdad and everything else. So I would say the mental problems came from that short period of time. When I got to Damascus and I was handed over to their secret police, these guys, they couldn't do enough for me. But it was just that small period of 24 hours of being taunted and told that I was going to die. At one point, I was in the desert. They dragged me out of a vehicle and they put a pistol to my head. And I was more annoyed at myself for handing myself over. I just walked for 7 days and 8 nights. And I thought, I could have walked to Damascus. It was a bizarre time. Wasn't the best week.
Well, no, following your consumption of radioactive water during your Bravo 20 escape, you actually were advised not to have any kids, but you're delighted to have that daughter of yours.
Yes, that was strange. When I got out, the 2IC of the embassy, he worked for a certain department within our security services.
Well, look, do you know something, Chris? It's the most fascinating story. We've got to get you in the studio to discuss it because the clock's against us. But let me tell you, your books are incredible. You've written for teenagers, for adults, fiction, non-fiction. Do check out the brilliant published work of Chris Ryan. Chris, we'll see you soon. Next up, I'll be dealing with the woke corporations Nike and Bud Light.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
It's 10 o'clock and this is Mark Dolan Tonight. In my take at 10, Bud Light are now crying into their beer as sales of their iconic lager have collapsed faster than one of their customers when they've had too many. And would you be willing to separate your rubbish into 7 different bins as proposed by the government? We'll be asking the Queen of Clean, Channel 4's Kim Woodburn. Plus, Mark Dolan Tonight is the home of the papers with tomorrow's front pages from 10:30. Big guests, big stories and always big opinions. My take at 10 next, but first, the headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Mark, thanks very much indeed. The top story on GB News tonight. RCN nurses will stage another round of strikes after rejecting a pay offer from the government, the same offer which Unison nurses overwhelmingly accepted. Royal College of Nursing members voted to reject a 5% pay rise this year, as well as a cash payment for last year. The action, running from 8 o'clock in the evening on the 30th of April for 48 hours, will for the first time involve nurses working in emergency departments, intensive care and cancer care. Well, Unison announced today that its NHS members had accepted the 5% pay offer. Paediatric nurse Olivia Princewell told GB News, however, the government could have offered more.
Junior doctors work for incredibly long hours. So do nurses in conditions that are absolutely ridiculous. To then come to work and be happy with the job, okay, that's not even safe for the patient. So what we're trying to do here, and I believe that's what everyone is trying to achieve, is come to a situation where there is a sort of agreement between us nurses, the junior doctors, and also the government to feel like when you're going to work, you're safe.
Well, civil servants will be holding fresh strikes after the government announced a pay rise of between 4.5% and 5% for them. The PCS union's General Secretary, though, described it as insulting and completely inadequate. So staff are going to be walking out in May and June across government departments, even in areas like the Met Office. The US President Joe Biden has, within the last few minutes, arrived in Ballina, where he will address a concert at the cathedral. He will also meet distant relatives while in the Irish town. Earlier, Biden visited Knock Shrine, County Mayo, as part of his final day of engagements, where he had a chance meeting at an Irish church with the priest who performed the last rites on his son, Beau. Father Frank O'Grady performed the sacrament for Beau Biden, who died of brain cancer in 2015. It brings Mr Biden's 4-day trip to Ireland to a close, which the former Taoiseach Enda Kenny has called the longest presidential visit ever to the island. Finally, Take That, Sabrina Turfel and Freya Riding are the British singers announced to perform at the King's coronation concert. Also there, American stars Katy Perry and Lionel Richie, as well as the Italian tenor Andrea Bocelli. The Coronation Choir, made up of community choirs and amateur singers from across the UK, will also perform. And the event will be held in the grounds of Windsor Castle in front of 20,000 members of the public and invited guests. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and on the TuneIn app. This is GB News. Back now to Mark Dolan.
My thanks to Polly Middlehurst, who's back at 11. Welcome to Mark Dolan Tonight. Would you be willing to separate your rubbish into 7 different bins as proposed by the government? Have you got time to do that? We'll be asking the Queen of Clean, Channel 4's Kim Woodburn. Plus, Mark Dolan Tonight is the home of the papers with tomorrow's front pages from 10:30. And we'll be introducing a new feature towards the end of the show. Big stories, big guests and always big opinions. Let's start with my take at 10. This story will have you spitting your beer out. The popular lager brand Bud Light, the perfect accompaniment to long, hot summer afternoons, and your best friend at a boring family barbecue, has left a bad taste in the mouth of its customers after employing the services of a biological male called Dylan Mulvaney, who plays at being a lady and identifies as female. She's been hired for a massive advertising campaign. So who is Dylan Mulvaney? Well, think of David Walliams's I'm a Lady character from Little Britain, but without the sex appeal. Bud Lights are now crying into their beer as sales of their iconic lager have collapsed faster than one of their customers when they've had too many. If you want to change your name and be he or she, then good luck to you. I am Mr. Freedom. But don't insult actual women with the pathetic and insulting theatrics as demonstrated by Mulvaney over the last few months, as she plays at being a woman and therefore wildly trivialises them. Here she is in action. Now, she's talking about her products. Of course, she's clad in lots of jewellery and tons of makeup, and it has rather sunk the value of their brand. There you go, bit of gymnastics, sportswear, brilliant stuff. She's also been messing around with a tampon, which apparently is hilarious. Well, I'll tell her where she can put that tampon. Women are being cancelled. They're being shut down, they're being erased, and with these sorts of antics, they're being laughed at as well. Do you really think that wearing a pair of high heels or brandishing a tampon is what makes for a woman? When will this madness end? Well, when corporations like Budweiser feel the impact on their bottom line, in this case to the tune of several $1 billion. Because be clear, by signing up to this particularly bonkers strain of progressive politics, i.e. gender ideology, which says that a man is a woman or a woman is a man, or claims there could be 100 genders, well, Budweiser, they're not trying to make the world a better place. They're making it a worse place for actual women. And they're masquerading as being inclusive, all whilst happily excluding half the population. Women are now second-class citizens. Someone with a cock and balls and sporting a 5 o'clock shadow but wearing a dress enjoys higher status in today's dystopian, morally vacant world. Most right-thinking people push back on this crap, which is why they've stopped drinking Bud Lights and are sick of these companies drinking the woke Kool-Aid. Meanwhile, you've got that prize numpty Daniel Radcliffe, star of Harry Potter, who would be flipping burgers at McDonald's on a tenner an hour if it wasn't for J.K. Rowling, saying that children should be allowed to choose their gender. What a deeply irresponsible thing to say. The treatment of children around this trans madness raises profound safeguarding issues and will, in time, I fear, amount to a Jimmy Savile situation times 100. As young children and teenagers are coaxed, brainwashed and cajoled into the idea that they were born in the wrong body and thus placed on a path of life-changing medication, including puberty blockers, drugs which literally stop the body going into puberty. Does that end well? Not to mention drastic operations, including breast removal and sexual organ reassignment that could ultimately see them unable to have children. This is progress, is it? To make matters worse, Mulvaney is also the face of Nike. The products that she sells? Well, sports bras. That's right, folks. A biological male, fully intact, handed a massive contract to sell underwear to women. Peak 2023. But there's now a chink in the woke armour, and that is the Bud Light story. It's hopefully a turning point, as this virtue signalling company will now have to chuck thousands of litres of their pissy beer down the drain and hopefully with it, their divisive and damaging ideas. Whether it's Nike, Bud Light, or anyone else for that matter, it's time to hit these corporations where it hurts, in the balls. That's assuming they've still got some. Let's get reaction now from one of the most successful corporate executives of her generation, Jennifer Say, a former national athletics champion who was one of the senior figures at Levi's, was tipped to take over as CEO of one of the most famous clothing brands in the world. What went wrong? Well, just a few innocent tweets early in the pandemic questioning the need for school closures and the masking of children. Astonishingly, although her objections to COVID measures were hardly controversial, this sorry drama ended in Jennifer's departure from Levi's. However, it has led to a best-selling book, Levi's Unbuttoned. The woke mob took my job but gave me my voice. And having accumulated a huge social media following and a massive wave of support for the stand she's taken, Jennifer Say has been calling out woke corporations ever since, and she joins me now. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you back on the show. Your reaction to the awarding of a promotion contract to Dylan Mulvaney for Bud Light?
You know, it's misguided, clearly, and the market has voted $5 billion market cap decline in just about a week. And I think that the thing is Bud Light is this big, broad reach brand. They need to bring people together, people with diverse views. They have to agree on the beer they're going to drink, right? And it's a beer that has typically been consumed by young guys. Their consumer has aged over the years and they haven't brought new ones into the fold. But the way to bring those young guys into the fold is to focus on what made the brand great in the first place: funny guy humor. That's what people liked about it, right? And yet their head of marketing, she was on a podcast just days before the campaign launching, speaking very critically and dismissively about their core consumer, calling them fratty and out of touch. Well, if you have disdain for your consumer who made the brand what it is, you're going to put forth marketing that does not resonate. And that's what we've seen. And this is an influencer. You know, I led the Levi's brand marketing for many years. I worked with tons of celebs and influencers. I always wanted someone that I knew that our fans would embrace, but also someone that loved the product, right? That wore our product and loved it and could speak about it authentically. I'm pretty sure Dylan does not drink Bud Light. And I'm pretty sure Dylan does not use Tampax. So these are just bad choices. Like a smaller brand could do it. They can be more provocative and they can wade into these issues. They don't have to appeal to as many people, but it's just such a classic case of not knowing your consumer and not knowing your brand and inserting ideology rather than good old product marketing.
Meanwhile, Dylan Mulvaney, who is a biological male, fully intact, that identifies as female, has been selling sports bras, even though she has no breasts. Again, your reaction to that as a former athlete and, dare I say it, as a woman?
Look, I think Nike has a long history of not necessarily treating their female endorsers well. You know, they are known for not having paid a pregnant track star. And now they're hiring biological men to tout women's products. A trans woman who doesn't, in fact, have boobs or breasts, as you said, which might be more appropriate. How is this going to resonate with their consumer base? It just doesn't make any sense, but it's what happens when you're in such an ideological bubble and you don't know people that think any differently than you do. It's like they don't even realize that it's controversial. They're so committed to how right this is that they don't realize how alienating it is.
Is the backlash in regards to Nike and Bud Light, is this something that is a turning point, do you think, Jennifer, in the war on woke?
You know what? I think it is. I think that, you know, the Bud Light CEO, the Anheuser-Busch CEO just made a statement before I got on here. And it's something to the effect of, you know, as a big brand, beloved brand, leading share, we seek to bring people together. Well, that's the opposite of what they just did, right? So, I think he's sending the strong signal across the bow that they're going to look to do more marketing that unites people, that's fun and funny as it's always been, and probably try to leave some of this ideological stuff out of the mix going forward. And I can assure you, a lot of brands are going to think twice about this. And what I really hope is we get back to business. Normie capitalism, as I call it in my book. Market the product, strive for product excellence, treat your consumer with respect, and let's move on.
Indeed, last
I
but
hope
not least,
it's the beginning of a change.
Yeah, last but not least, Jennifer, does this story demonstrate how out of touch these corporations are with mainstream public opinion and perhaps this issue mirrored in the media, at the top levels of government, public institutions, universities, you name it?
Yeah, they're absolutely in an elite bubble. Like if you look at the VP of Marketing's, resume, which is, a very high pedigree, Harvard and Wharton Business School, you can be very certain that she probably doesn't drink Bud Light. Her friends don't drink it. They drink craft beers and fancy cocktails. And she believes that her ideology is what everybody believes. And anyone who doesn't is like some kook, right? Some lunatic bigot. And that's just not the case. Yeah. And so, she was okay perhaps alienating those folks because they're bad people and we don't need them. Well, you know what? That's a really bad commercial approach. You want to keep the fans you have and build on that to gain more. And that's not what happened. So I think they need a reset. I think the CEO has strongly signaled that's what they're going to do. And I do think big brands, big broad reach brands like this are going to think twice. And are going to really strive to get back to the basics and get back to business and focus on product again with, uplifting campaigns that engage a lot of people.
What they need to do is hire Jennifer Say, but let's be honest, I don't think they can afford you.
Yeah, they're still scared of me, so I don't think they want me yet. They don't love people who speak their mind and don't talk from a script, so we'll see what happens.
And that's at the heart of the problem. Jennifer, congratulations on the book. It's out now. Levi's Unbuttoned. Jennifer Say, thank you. We'll catch up soon. You're watching Mark Dolan tonight. We've got the papers at exactly 10:30 sharp. But next, TV star Kim Woodburn. Would you be willing to separate your rubbish into 7 different bins? That's what the government want. We'll discuss that next.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith. Is that not the start of the slippery slope? It's very much so. And the big moral questions of the day. I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, a brilliant email from Malcolm. Corporations shall learn the error of their ways via the customer, spending elsewhere. Malcolm, thank you for that. We know that it's go woke, go broke, don't we? We have that from Jenny, who says, hi, Mark, it is simple, go woke, go broke, and we must make sure it does. There you go. Well, look, we'll get to more of your emails shortly. What's Richard got to say? Mark, these companies are starting to realise that woke does indeed make you broke. Beyond the hipster coffee-sipping elite, there is the real world of common sense that votes with their wallets. There you go. Well, this show is all about harnessing people power, so let's not waste it, shall we? Lots more to get through. Don't forget the papers at exactly 10:30 sharp. But next up, it's time for The Newsmaker, in which we tackle a big story of the day in the company of a fearless commentator. Tonight, recycling plans that could see every household with 7 bins to sort through are reportedly being delayed until after the local elections as the strategy sees a backlash from voters. Well, there's a surprise. Would you be willing to separate your rubbish into 7 separate bins every week? Let's ask the Queen of Clean herself, media personality and star of Channel 4's How Clean Is Your House, Kim Woodburn. Hi, Kim.
Hello. How are you? You know,
I'm very well. Now, Kim Woodburn, how many bins do you have currently?
Well, we've got 3 currently. We've got the gardening bin, we've got the paper, tin and glass bin, and we've got the food bin. My lovey, isn't that enough? I mean, how can we cope with 7? What about these poor souls that live in a little terraced house that you walk in from the street? Is it going to be all out? They're going to be all lining the road. You won't be able to walk on the pavement, dear. It's utterly disgusting. The councils don't want to do anything for the money. Now, most people pay a load of money on the council tax. And what are they doing for it? I look out of my window. The grass verge has got no grass. It's bald earth where they won't come and treat them. I've got 7 foot of weeds in all the gutters. I've got the bollards at the end of the road broken down, haven't been fixed for 6 months. The whole place is disgusting. And now they want to make more money off us by we do their work for them. When's it going to stop?
Indeed. And you know how, Kim, you know how lazy people can be. Half the public won't bother with this, will they?
Well, of course, they won't. But look at a young mother with a couple of babies, hubby's out at work. How is she going to drag 7 bins? And where's she going? The whole thing is impractical. And the whole thing is letting the council off for working. They won't, as I say, if you look at the condition of our roads, our parks, our weeds, now they want us to do the dustbin work for them. It's wrong, my love, and I'm going to tell you something. And I know we've got troubled times. I don't want to make any more. I'm well aware. But you know what we've got to do, and I hope you approve. We have got to cancel paying our council tax. It's the only way the council is going to do something. We never do it. Still got our council tax paid month after month out of our banks. Stop paying it. Cancel the banker's order. And you tell them they cannot do this to us. Folks, brave up, because next year it'll be 10 bins. I'm warning you, don't do it.
So you're suggesting we should defund our local authority?
But they're fleecing us blind, my love. We're already paying them money. When you pay your council tax, they tell you, we will do the roads, we will fill the potholes, we will see that the signs on the road are clean, we will see the drains haven't got plants. My plant drain's got a plant growing out of it. But that's part of what we pay council tax. Now they're suggesting if we can close down some recycling centres where we have men on a conveyor belt sorting, because you have 7 bins, we can close that down and save us money. They don't do the job anyway. Why are we paying all this money? Folks, I'm sorry. I'll say it. I'm sorry, Mark. But the only thing they're going to listen to is when you stop their money. If we all did it in the same street, What are they going to do to us? Look, lovey, stop the money. They've got to listen when you hit their pocket. Now, truly, I'm going to stop it, dear. You'll see me arrested. But I don't care. I've had enough. Do you know I go out and clean my street sign? Do you know I was whistled at by a lorry driver the other morning? My street sign on the corner is filthy. I live in quite a posh house, you know. My street sign's filthy. I went out with a bucket of water in soap and I was washing the street sign. And some of the names as lorry drivers called me doing the whistles. Well, I quite enjoyed it, actually. Why am I washing the road sign? Do you see what it's come to? Folks, don't give in to them. Stop paying your council tax. Stop.
OK, now, of course, you know, Kim, that I'm a very well-behaved boy. I'm very law-abiding, and I could never encourage my viewers or listeners not to pay any of their taxes. It's the law, but you're entitled to your view. Plenty will be nodding away as they listen to this. As an expert on keeping the house clean, what items should we be separating? What would be the perfect solution, do you think?
Well, I think we've got enough now. We separate our bottles, we separate our newspapers, we set our gardening, of course. I mean, you know, gardening, we separate all that. And we separate our cardboard and that. Don't you think we can't be responsible, each household, for doing the council's job for them? And that's what they want. And you know it, you cannot have 7 dustbins. My love, we couldn't cope with it. And especially in the little terraced houses you enter from the pavement. 7 bins outside. How are people going to walk on the pavements? They're only about 3 foot wide anyway. How's a lady getting on with a pram? An elderly person with walking sticks? It's not practical, my love. You're going to cause more problems than enough. Now, come on. And also, why would we pay for what we're not getting? Would you go into a shop and tender £50, they gave you nothing? We're paying to have this done by them, and each year they're trying to get us to do more and more and more, and they're given less and less and less.
Briefly, Kim, briefly, I've had an email from one of your fans. It's Anthony, who says, Mark, all views are good and GB News is great at that, but you cannot promote law breaking. Would you be willing to go to jail in protest at 7 bins?
I would. I would.
All right.
Because if it gets noticed, look, you know what? I've got a big enough garden. I've got a big enough front garden. But you've got to think of the people that haven't, dear. They haven't. What about old people dragging 7? Somehow would have to drag them from the little backyard right through their hallway. A little old man, 7 bins. Oh, come on.
There you go.
Before you say the word, think of the old. We've got. Look, I'm an.
Well, look, Kim. Let me tell you, if you get banged up, I will be visiting. I will bring cake, and maybe we'll be granted our conjugal rights. I bloody hope so.
Look,
the
dear,
fabulous Kim Woodburn.
You and I will queue together.
There you go. That's the solution. We can bunk up. The brilliant Kim Woodburn. Dropper of truth bombs. She'll be back very soon. Speaking of truth bombs, I've got tomorrow's front pages. There are some very spicy stories, let me tell you. All of that is next with full pundit reaction. Don't go anywhere.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Dubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel. OK, it's exactly 10:30, which is why every Friday, Saturday and Sunday, it's time for this. That's right, tomorrow's papers hot off the press, and we start with the Daily Mail. They lead with the following. Fears of chaos if doctors and nurses strike together. Now, this relates to our earlier monologue at 8 o'clock. The NHS is braced for a summer of mayhem after nurses tonight rejected a pay deal, raising fears they could coordinate future strikes with junior doctors. Free £3 with Paddy Power Grand National Bet. That's right, it's the Grand National tomorrow. We'll be covering that at length on Mark Dolan tonight, because I do love a bit of a flutter and I love horse racing, but do gamble responsibly. OK, next up, let's have the Daily Express. Despite it all, the King is proud of Harry. Well, what have they put in his tea? Has he been on the cooking sherry again? The King has spoken of his immense pride in both his sons, days after it was initially finally confirmed that Harry will attend his coronation. The Daily Telegraph, King's pride in his sons also leads in their paper. COVID will stay a mystery, says Chinese expert, probably thanks to the Chinese expert. Also, nurses to target A&E in most extreme strike yet. Adding further resonance to our 8 o'clock monologue, which you can catch on Twitter right now at GB News. The Independent, just how much more can NHS patients take? Nurses reject a 5% pay deal and vote for all-out 48-hour strike with no exemptions for emergency care. The Guardian, nursing strikes could go on until Christmas. And almost all clinics break the law over Botox. Well, that's a story that will raise an eyebrow or two. Nicely done. I'm here all week. Thank you. Try the liver. The Eye weekend, nurses strike to hit cancer care and A&E as Sunak pay offer rejected. The Daily Mirror also featuring a free bet for the Grand National. And coronation crackdown. Cops target terror groups, anarchists and anti-royalists over threats to ceremony. And the Daily Star. French nick our weather. Storm warning. They swoop in to give alerts. Names like Noah. That's right. The French steal everything, don't they? Including all the best ideas. Those are your front pages. Brilliant stuff. Lots of coverage of the King and his comments about his pride in relation to two of his sons. Can I convey my pride? Because we will be offering you and providing blanket coverage of the wonderful coronation celebrations as of the 6th of May. But I'll be on air for the 5th, the 6th and the 7th. I'll be down at Buckingham Palace and we will celebrate like it's going out of fashion. So make sure that you keep your channel tuned to GB News, whether you're listening on the radio, watching on the telly. GB News is your royal coronation channel. Now let's get reaction to those front pages in the company of author and political commentator Emma Wolfe, historian and writer David Oldroyd-Bolt, and journalist and broadcaster Lizzie Zeta. Emma, we're back to the topic of my 8 o'clock monologue. Fears of chaos if doctors and nurses strike together.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely shocking. I think this needs to stop right now. They need to start getting around the table and negotiating like grown-ups. I'm not saying that the nurses and doctors and paramedics don't have a case, but the whole country is going through a cost of living crisis. You know, let us say it again. These pay demands are absolutely off the scale. The doctors demanding 35% is complete madness. And no matter what happens, they need to come to some kind of resolution. This can't go on.
Now, they would argue that,
and when you talk
they've
about
been
nurses,
underpaid for decades, and also that 35% is an opening gambit.
Yeah, I know. Opening gambit, whatever. This is not the point. The point is lives are going to be lost. When you start talking, when this starts hitting A&E, cancer care and other critical care, lives are going to be lost. And this needs to stop.
Will the public forgive the striking NHS workers, David?
I think there is a lot of public softness towards the case because we see them every day doing jobs that most people couldn't conceive of doing. However, when their family members start to die and cancer care isn't carried out, when people go to A&E and aren't treated, I think the softness towards their case will harden very quickly. The Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm, should be in the forefront of every medic's mind. This is a vocation. This is not something you should go into because you want to earn a lot of money. This is something you should go into because you want to save people's lives and make the lives of those you care for better. And if you're going to put people's lives at direct risk by withdrawing emergency medical care, you're breaking that oath, and therefore you're breaking the terms of your covenant with the British people who pay your wages. And I think that's abhorrent.
They would argue that they amass massive debt, tens of thousands of pounds, becoming medical students and pursuing a career in medicine.
And then end up being paid very well for it. A first-year medical student, once out of university and in training, is paid £34,000 to £37,000. That's above the national average wage. And these are people who, if they go on into consultancy, will earn vastly more than most people they treat will ever earn. Even if they go into general practice, they will still earn per year 2 or 3 or even 4 times as much as the average person in this country. They are not hard done by. Yes, they carry debt, but so does every graduate. And they will pay that debt off, and they will have better and more richly rewarded lives. I fear that this is a case of a great moral disjunct in the medical profession, not entirely, but among those who are propounding it, and I don't think that the British public sympathy will last that much longer.
Lizzie?
I completely agree with everything that has been said. I think that really this needs to be sorted out now. It's very, very urgent. They're talking about striking until Christmas. It's a very, very difficult situation. Yes, of course, we would like to give a good raise to the nurses and also the doctors. But the fact is that if we put their salaries up too much, it's going to push us into inflation. That's just a fact. And we are in a dangerous situation of people starting to lose their lives. I know a lot of people that are going through cancer treatment at the moment, friends of mine, and it really concerns me.
And when we talk about people who are being badly paid, can we talk about care workers who are dealing with people in elderly people in care homes? Can we talk about nursery workers who are looking after our babies and our young children for £6, £7, £8 an hour? There are people who are really...
No contract, no pension,
no contract,
no sick pay, often.
No contract, no, they're not working in comfortable large hospitals. They don't have any of those benefits. They are really scandalously, disgustingly badly paid. They're not striking.
And junior doctors now are not working the sort of hours that most people who are GPs and consultants would have done as junior doctors themselves, when their 100-hour week was perfectly normal. And junior doctors had to often live on hospital grounds.
And they're not allowed
because
to now.
Because of the European Working Time Directive, they're doing 45, 50-hour weeks at most. So it's not like the old days when they were really paid very little and they had to do huge amounts of work. They're doing less work for more money.
Well, I mean, the average salary for a GP in this country is around £140,000 now. That's the average salary for a GP.
This is not the salary for junior doctors. I mean, these people are working all the hours they've got.
No, I'm sorry,
they have a clinical role. Do you really want them paid a bit more than a cafe barista? Given the fact
I thought that was disgusting, that whole campaign doing down baristas who are also doing a job.
Yeah.
You're not better because you're a junior doctor. Junior doctors is a very inaccurate term. It means anything up to consultant level. So that's a huge range of people.
Yeah. You've got salaries
which also they need to negotiate. They need to discuss all this.
And Lizzie, they go into the profession to look after people. They wouldn't go on strike if they weren't desperate.
No.
They're desperate.
They're desperate. I think they've been...
I mean,
also...
the nurses are desperate. They're living out of food banks, many of them. They are struggling.
Yes,
and that's
we
why
need
they've
to
done
come.
it.
We do need to come to some kind of arrangement with them. Absolutely, the government needs to sit down with them and talk and come to some kind of arrangement with them.
Argument
but we
is 5%,
are paying.
Their argument is that 5% won't even touch the sides in terms of what they need.
Well, maybe the government needs
and
to
the
look
rest
at it
of us
again.
haven't.
But
what about
we
the rest
are
of us?
paying £233 billion a year to the national health. It's costing us. It's not tenable that we continue in this manner anyway, because it's on its knees. There are going to be certain parts of the national health that we can't carry on like this. People are living a lot longer. When we started with the national health, people were only living until they were 60. When I was a kid, people started dying at 60.
Emma,
it was normal.
Does this bring the NHS into disrepute? Are they, the militant unions, unaware of the damage they're doing to the reputation of the service?
I think it does bring them into disrepute. I think, yes, there's still a lot of affection just about clinging on, but I think if this goes on, it isn't just people losing their lives. It's old people who have a hip replacement scheduled. When you're living in pain, those kinds of things. I know a woman whose operation has been scheduled and booked, and she gets tense about it and worried about it and prepares for it. It's been cancelled and rescheduled 6 times. OK, she's only an old person living in poverty and in pain. She doesn't matter. She's not going to die from it. That's people's lives. She's paid taxes all her life for a functioning NHS.
My husband is due to have a scan. It's been cancelled 4 times now. And I'm at the point, I said, go privately. Let's just pay for it because it's, how much does it cost? Let's try and do this privately because you can't be sitting around with your health and waiting for the NHS to pull together.
Plenty of medics are against these strikes. And in fact, when it comes to the various pay offers that are put to members, almost half often support it, including with the case of the nurses. But it seems like these unions are in the hands of a hard-left militant...
They are.
And that union boss was off on holiday.
They are.
Well, that is the problem, isn't it? That a lot of public sector unions have been captured as they were in the 60s and 70s. It was got rid of in the 80s and 90s, but they've been captured again by a hard-left cadre. But on this question, I have to ask the nation once more, how much longer is the nation going to stick its head in the sand about the NHS? It is an unaffordable system that does not give good health outcomes. If we want the sort of system that they have abroad, where people are well paid and the health outcomes are good, we need a mixture of public and private.
Yes.
Junior doctors saying they're going off to Australia. No, we don't. We have a nationalised system that has some options for private if you want to pay a huge amount for it. Junior doctors going off to Australia to be paid better. Why is that? Because Australia has a mixture of public and private. We need to stop with this false dichotomy that it's either the NHS or it's the American system. It's not. The vast majority of the world, particularly Europe, where those who love the NHS probably have second houses in Tuscany and the Dordogne, works on the basis of a mixed healthcare system where you can pay people well because it's coming from both the state and from private enterprise. If we want to have a health system that looks after an ageing population, an obese population, a population that has ever more complex outcomes and pays its practitioners and nurses well, we need to move away from a purely tax-funded model, and we need to do it urgently.
Furthermore, I think if you can afford to pay to go privately, then you should.
Yes.
You should, and take the burden off.
That means that you're paying twice.
Yes, exactly. That's the problem.
Yeah, but if you're paying twice, then so be it. If you can
like
get
poor old
seen...
Kim Woodburn having to wash the street signs outside her house.
Yeah, but everybody... Can I just say, Rishi Sunak was asked
fixing the
again...
potholes outside his Hollywood mansion.
Rishi Sunak was asked again and again and again if he'd ever used private care. And I'm thinking, he should. He's loaded. He should use private care.
And Margaret Thatcher said she did with pride.
Yeah.
Have the NHS hastened their own demise, do you think, Emma, with these policies?
I think we need to get away from this idea that the NHS can do no wrong, that nurses and doctors are gods and goddesses. Well, no, but there's still this idea that that you really can't criticise them. Actually, you can, and many of them are well paid, and they need to get around the table.
Daily Express, despite it all, the King is proud of Harry. Do you believe him?
No, I don't believe... Well, look, he loves his sons. Of course he does. And he's got a good son and he's got the prodigal son. So he's got
a good son and a nightmare.
And the
ginger sheep.
It's so awful that this is being played out in the public eye just when Charles is going to have his coronation. It's just despicable.
Although
on the
credit, don't you think, to the King for the tone he's setting?
Yes,
definitely.
I think His Majesty's been dignified throughout.
Yes.
And it's an extraordinary and wonderful thing to watch this man, who has been absolutely pilloried by his daughter-in-law, retain his dignity at a time of great pressure. It is, I think, to the good of the nation that the Duchess of Sussex has decided to spend more time on a suntan, and to the good of the nation that the Duke of Sussex is coming.
Well, look, there you go. Let me reiterate that Mark Dolan tonight is the home of the coronation, as is the whole of GB News, from the 5th, the 6th and the 7th of May. That's right, we'll be on air. I'll be down at the Palace to celebrate this extraordinary national moment. So don't miss a second. All of your favourite contributors, Kinsey Schofield, Tom Bauer, Ken Wharf, all the hits, all the stars. So we're massively looking forward. Greg, you better get booking those pretty soon, because they do get snapped up. Look, we've got all of that to come. And let me tell you that the King and Harry and Meghan will be featuring in a brand new feature on this show next. And it's going to be the headline heroes and the back page baddies. Find out more after this. Plus, I've got tomorrow's Times as well. Don't go anywhere.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Well, look, some brilliant emails coming in, as always. It's the highlight of the show when you get in touch. Mark at gbnews.uk. It's been such a busy show. I wish I'd got through more of them, but thank you for every single one. James has said, in relation to the NHS and the junior doctors on strike, as well as the nurses, can you publish the breakdown of the costs in the NHS, particularly the administration and the wokery? Well, almost half of what goes into the NHS is not related to clinical care. So there's your problem there, James. But thank you for that. Another James says, Mark, are the medical professionals who are striking part of the generation who have been overindulged and have a great sense of entitlement? Don't forget, says Gerard, that junior doctors begin to earn later than other graduates. Most of the courses are 5 years long. It's 6 years at Oxbridge and Imperial College. So by the time they begin to work, they've not earned what others earned and also paid for the extra years. So there you go. Although director Chloe said that was their choice, which is a fair point. Always good to hear from the director. Yvonne has said the real cost of living crisis is the immigration problem in this country. George says, Mark, immediate termination of employment of all nurses and junior doctors, followed by rehiring of those accepting the offered salary, is the effective answer. Well, that's what someone like Michael O'Leary of Ryanair would do. Why can't the public sector sharpen up in the same way and think in a more entrepreneurial way? That's a great debate. Keep those emails coming. Mark at gbnews.uk. I've got another of the front pages for you, and it is The Times. And they lead with, again, a story that we covered at 8 o'clock tonight because we're ahead of the curve where possible on Mark Dolan tonight. The Times, nurses set for more strikes. Junior doctors push for joint walkout as NHS safety fears grow. Jane Seymour, I'm still close to all 4 of my ex-husbands. What a brave lady.
Large bed.
Big bed, exactly. Where does she get the energy from? Now, look, welcome to a brand new feature on Mark Dolan tonight. We're always trying to innovate. And tonight I'll be asking my top pundits for their headline heroes and back page baddies. So, who should we celebrate and who should we give a big fat raspberry to? And let's start, if we can, Emma Wolfe, with your headline hero.
My hero is Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, for not coming to the coronation and for staying in California.
So she's a hero for putting a button on it and staying home.
I'm just giving us a break, yeah.
Do you think... What?
Also,
you're a good psychologist of human nature. Why do you think she has stayed home? Because I would have thought this publicity-hungry woman would love to be there.
I think she's crying at not being able to come, but I also think she's absolutely terrified of the public opprobrium, and I think she may well actually be booed. Also, I think she doesn't want to be a second-class guest citizen.
She won't sit at the back. The cheap seats.
Nobody puts Meghan behind a pillar. She was apparently going to be put behind a pillar in Westminster Abbey, and that's not acceptable. She doesn't want to be in the second row, does she? If she's here, she wants to be on the balcony, watching the fly past. Also, you imagine the reception that the royal family... We all know what the things that they... The irony of this all is that Harry wrote the book, not Meghan, and I'm talking about it as though Meghan wrote Spare, although she probably did, although the ghostwriter wrote Spare. Meghan probably then had a look at it. Anyway, nothing to do with Harry.
It will have required Miss Markle's approval.
Miss Markle's stamp, exactly.
Him pussy whipped. Very much so. Very much so.
What do you think motivated her decision to sit this one out? Cowardice or dignity?
I think it's I think she's terrified she'll get pelted with eggs. Everyone was very tolerant. We loved her when she came, and that there was a beautiful wedding. She looked gorgeous. She wore that stunning dress. She was really welcomed into this country. I'm sure that she did have problems within the palace, I'm sure, but this is not the way to do it. You do not air all your family problems in public and write a book and get paid 100 million for a Netflix show. It's ridiculous.
But wouldn't her appearance at the coronation give her and Harry the opportunity to bury the hatchet?
Oh, it would, yeah, but she has no interest in doing that because once they bury the hatchet, she ceases to be of any relevance whatsoever because they're just another part of the royal family then. Her entire raison d'etre is that she should be something else. She should be a royal plus. And the fact that she won't come to the coronation, I think, is rightly to be celebrated because it means that the focus will be on His Majesty and not on this appalling sideshow.
Yes.
She should stay in California forever.
Yes, David. And I think it's going to be pretty quick. Harry will come in and out and get out.
Yeah.
But it's not even about what the royal family did or didn't do to her. It's about the fact that, I mean, they've been emailing the palace, demanding this and demanding an apology. An apology for what?
Oh, the hubris is extraordinary.
And I think David is absolutely right. King Charles has just risen, and William, they've just risen above it. They have not responded. And that is the only way to deal with Harry and Meghan. Not even give them any apology, just not even respond.
I think that, King Charles is head of the church And a big part of Christianity is forgiveness. I don't think this is spoken about enough, really. And that I think that he has acted with such dignity. I think he's in pieces and he is holding out the...
Deeply embarrassing.
It's deeply embarrassing. He's holding out the olive branch to his prodigal son.
Well,
and he would be delighted if... And he, in a way, he needs to behave like that to show an example of how a good father behaves in family disputes.
Yes,
he's done that in spades.
Indeed, and another good example would be his brother William, but there you go. How about your headline hero, David?
I'm picking the European Space Agency because I think it's wonderful that in a time of constant talk about net zero, when we've got rid of Concorde and we seem to be retrenching technologically, we seem to be closing down the borders of our exploration of the world and of space. We've suddenly reversed that and decided that we're going to go into space, we're going to try and do more, look beyond the borders of our own planet. I think this is wonderful. It gives hope.
No.
Emma's not happy?
No. We've messed up this world. We can barely even run a country.
Oh, I don't agree.
And we're planning to go and make a mess of outer space.
We're going to explore. We're going to see what's there.
A disaster.
All right, well, there you go, Spark.
See what can be found.
To feed our old people.
It's what this show's all about, the divided opinions. Lizzie, briefly, if you can, your headline hero.
Alexei Navalny.
Now, who be he?
He is the leader of the Russian opposition. He's in jail on trumped-up fraud charges. I think he is such a hero. He's so brave. He was poisoned once, and now today I read that they suspect that he's also been poisoned again.
Yeah.
And we don't know because we can't clarify anything because he's kept in this appalling jail. He can't even stand up properly. He can't read.
He is
letters.
A hero. He is a hero, and he's my
and they're
nomination.
Trying to silence him.
He is officially the front page headline hero, as I'm the editor of this virtual newspaper.
Good.
Well done to Greg and the team for the lovely little graphic, by the way, the pretend
Thank you,
newspaper. I got an email recently saying that GB News should have a newspaper. Check out our website, GB News. OK, very quickly now, I'm going to power through the baddies. Just a sentence each, if you can. Emma, your backstage baddie.
My baddie is Prince Harry for coming.
OK, so there you go. She strokes with one hand and slaps with the other. David, your backpage baddie.
Mentioned it earlier, the Netherlands for allowing children under 12 to be murdered because they happen to be ill. I think anybody who advocates euthanasia in this country needs to look at what's happening in Canada, in the Netherlands and in Belgium. It is abhorrent and it should be condemned.
And then, Lizzie, I think you've got a back page baddie that we can all agree on.
Xi Jinping, because he
said
he wanted to be to remarket himself as being lovable at the same time as facing up to Taiwan. I'm sure that they're going to go in and invade and take Taiwan for sure.
Deeply troubling. Well, look, I'm going to go for Prince Harry for the back page baddie, closely followed by Xi Jinping, the leader of the Chinese Communist Party. Look, it's been a brilliant show. Thank you for your company. Enjoyed all the emails. Thanks to my brilliant guests, my amazing panel. We'll do it all again tomorrow from 9. Keep it. GB News Headliners is next.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Doobs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith. Is that not the start of the slippery slope?
It's very much so.
And the big moral questions of the day. I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.